Imagine silence. Not the kind of silence that falls over a city late at night, threaded with distant hums and the echoes of life. And not the silence of an abandoned house, where the dust of memories hangs in the air. Imagine an absolute, mathematically perfect silence. The silence of Lagrange Point 2. 1.5 million kilometers, nearly 1 million miles, from Earth, in the perpetual shadow of our planet, where the temperature drops to minus 233 degrees Celsius, minus 387 degrees Fahrenheit. Here, in this icy, sterile void, drifts the most perfect eye humanity has ever created, the James Webb Space Telescope. $10 billion, decades of work by the finest minds on the planet, embodied in 6.5 metric tons of beryllium, gold, and captain. Its 18 hexagonal mirrors, coated with an impossibly thin layer of gold for maximum sensitivity to infrared light, form a giant honeycomb atlas covering 25 square meters. This is not just a telescope. It's a time machine, an instrument built to peer into the very first moments of the universe's existence, to see the light of the first stars born from the primordial chaos after the Big Bang. It is our emissary to the past, our sharpest and most fragile eye, floating in a gravitational well where the pull of the Earth and Sun cancel each other out, creating the perfect observation platform. Its giant 5-layer sun shield, the size of a tennis court, blocks the heat and light of our own world, allowing its sensitive instruments to cool to temperatures near absolute zero. This is necessary to capture the faint, ancient light that has traveled for 13.5 billion years to reach us. Every detail of the James Webb is a triumph of engineering, the culmination of our drive to know the unknowable. It is us, our curiosity, our courage, our hope, cast in metal and sent into the eternal night. And here, in this perfect silence, in this harmony of technology and cosmos calibrated to the nanometer, between May 23rd and May 25th, 2022, something went wrong. The official version, as is often the case, sounded mundane and reassuring. It appeared as a short press release on NASA's website, then was picked up by science publications around the world. The headline was restrained. Webb telescope sustains micrometeoroid impact. The text was written in a measured corporate style designed to preempt any panic. The system, as we call it, worked flawlessly. It reported a problem, but immediately wrapped it in a cocoon of context and assurances. We were told that outer space is not an absolute void. It's filled with tiny particles, specks of dust left over from the formation of the solar system, fragments of comets and asteroids. These particles, micrometeoroids, travel at colossal speeds, dozens of times faster than a bullet. Collisions with them, as mission engineers assured us, were not just likely, but inevitable. They were factored into the risk model back in the telescope's design phase. We always knew that Webb would have to weather the harsh space environment, the press release quoted Paul Geithner, technical deputy project manager at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. We designed and built Webb with performance margin, optical, thermal, electrical, mechanical, to ensure it can sustain its mission. We were informed that the strike hit one of the 18 segments of the primary mirror, a segment designated C3. It left a tiny but noticeable mark. However, the report continued. Thanks to the outstanding work of engineers who were able to adjust the position of the damaged segment, the impact on the telescope's overall performance was minimal. Yes, irreparable damage was done. But this damage was not critical. Webb was still exceeding all scientific requirements for the mission. The story was complete. There was an incident, a reaction, a solution. Everything was under control. A cosmic dust bunny, no bigger than a grain of sand, had slammed into our most expensive scientific instrument. A setback? Yes, but a predictable one. an unavoidable risk of doing business in space. The headline should have read, "A miracle of engineering withstands the fury of the cosmos." And for a while, the world accepted this version. The scientific community breathed a sigh of relief. The public, after a fleeting glance at the news, forgot about it in 5 minutes. Just another day in space. But for those accustomed to reading between the lines, for those who know that the most important truths are often hidden, not in the words spoken, but in the deafening silence of omission, this story felt wrong from the very beginning. Too neat. Too convenient. Too much like a carefully constructed narrative designed to close a topic, not open it. And this is where our investigation begins. It doesn't start with classified documents or insider testimony. It starts with what the system itself gives us, trusting that no one will dig deep enough. It begins in the public archives. The MAST archive, or the Mikulski archive for space telescopes, is a giant digital library where NASA stores the raw data from its observatories, including Hubble and, of course, the James Webb. It's a gesture of unprecedented scientific transparency. Anyone with an internet connection can download terabytes of information, images, spectra, observation logs, telemetry. The system shows us everything, or at least what it wants us to see. For most, it's just a collection of incomprehensible files with long, complex names. But for seekers, for those armed with patience and a healthy dose of skepticism, it's a hunting ground. And it was here, in these cold, impersonal streams of bits and bytes, that the first crack in the official version began to widen into a gaping chasm. The process was painstaking. We had to cross-reference timestamps. NASA's press release vaguely indicated a period between May 23rd and May 25th. This was the first blind spot. Why such a wide window? A micrometeoroid strike is an instantaneous event. The telescope's telemetry should have recorded the exact time down to the microsecond. The moment of the pressure spike on the mirror's surface. The moment of its abrupt change in position. The moment the correction systems engaged. That data had to exist. But it wasn't in the public report. There was only a 48-hour window. This isn't the kind of precision NASA is famous for. This is the look of intentional ambiguity. The first step was clear. We had to find the exact time of the impact. By sifting through telemetry logs, files detailing the telescope's system status, we could find the anomaly. And we found it. In one of the log files labeled engineering data was an entry for an unscheduled sharp correction to the position of segment C3. The timestamp was precise. May 24th, 2022, 00:11:34 UTC. There it was, the moment of impact. Not a vague 2-day window, but a specific second. And once you have the exact time, you can ask the most important, most obvious, and, as it turned out, most inconvenient question for NASA. What exactly was the James Webb Space Telescope doing at that very second? Where was it looking? This was the key question. And the answer had to be in another set of public data, the observation schedule. For an instrument as complex and expensive as Webb, every second of its operation is scheduled months in advance. Astronomers from around the world compete for the privilege of using it, and their proposals undergo a rigorous selection process. The observation schedule is a public document. All we had to do was find which scientific program was running at that exact minute. And this is where the investigation hit its first real wall. The schedule for that time listed a calibration, a technical procedure, pointing at a bright, well-studied standard object to check and fine-tune the instruments. This is routine. This is normal. But what was the object? In the target column was a designation that meant absolutely nothing to most people. 3I Atlas. 3I Atlas. For an astronomer, that designation speaks volumes. The letter I stands for interstellar. The number 3 means it was only the third such object ever discovered by humanity. The first was the famous cigar-shaped Oumuamua. The second was Comet 2I Borisov. And this was the third visitor from the depths of space. 3I Atlas was discovered by the Atlas system, Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, in 2021. It was a faint, barely perceptible dot moving on a strange, hyperbolic orbit. It did not come from our solar system. Its trajectory pointed to an origin from a direction devoid of bright stars, from the void between the spiral arms of the galaxy. This object was, in itself, a colossal scientific mystery. Unlike Comet Borisov, it showed almost no cometary activity. It didn't emit gas and dust as it approached the sun, as normal comets do. Its spectral analysis from ground-based telescopes yielded strange, contradictory results. It was too dark, reflecting too little light, almost like a piece of coal. But its movement, it didn't obey gravity alone. A faint but distinct non-gravitational acceleration was detected. Something was pushing this object, but it wasn't jets of gas, as with a comet. Mainstream science cautiously suggested it might be the sublimation of ices hidden beneath its dark surface. But this was just a hypothesis, one of many. 3I Atlas was a ghost, an anomaly, a visitor from nowhere that didn't behave as it should. And now, connecting the two dots, we get a picture that sends a chill down the spine. At the very second that an unidentified particle, labeled a micrometeoroid, struck our most perfect eye, that eye was aimed directly at the most mysterious interstellar object we had ever seen. Now go back and reread NASA's official press release. Reread the dozens of articles in science journals that cited it. You'll find everything. Details about the damage, quotes from engineers, assurances of reliability, explanations of the nature of micrometeoroids. Everything but one thing. Nowhere, not in a single official document dedicated to this incident, is the name of the observation target mentioned. Not a single word about 3I Atlas. This is a deafening, screaming omission. It's not just a detail they forgot to include. In science, where context is everything, omitting the observation target at the moment of an anomaly is an unthinkable breach of protocol. It's like investigating a plane crash, but forgetting to mention where the plane was flying. This is an information black hole so large it cannot be accidental. The system told us a story about a random speck of dust, but it concealed the fact that this speck of dust appeared at the most dramatic possible moment. The moment of an intense stare down with the greatest mystery to ever visit our solar system. Coincidence? Or choreography? Correlation does not imply causation, scientists tell us. But when a coincidence is this perfect, this cinematic, this meaningful, ignoring it ceases to be scientific skepticism. It becomes an act of blind faith in the official version. Faith that a bullet fired in the dark will accidentally hit the only person looking at the shooter through a sniper scope. The probability of such an event is not just small, it approaches zero, and we are left with a chilling conclusion. We were lied to. Not crudely, not directly. We were lied to through omission, through a carefully constructed half-truth. The incident with the James Webb was not just a technical malfunction. It was an event. And that event was directly connected to 3I Atlas. The only question is, what was that connection? Was it a tragic accident they decided not to publicize to avoid speculation? Or was it something much worse? What if it wasn't us watching it at that moment? What if it was watching us? And what we call a micrometeoroid impact was not a collision. It was a response. To find the first crack in the monolithic wall of the official version, you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist. You just need to be attentive. You need to listen not only to what is said, but also to what is deafeningly silent. The system built its explanation on a foundation of randomness. A random speck of dust, a random time, a random place. It's a powerful narrative because the universe, as we're taught from childhood, is full of random events. Space is a chaos of billions of flying rocks, and sometimes their paths intersect with ours. The concept is simple, understandable, and most importantly, it absolves all responsibility and dismisses further questions. It was an act of nature. Cosmic weather. No one is to blame. Move along. But for a moment, let's treat the official version with the same rigor that NASA engineers apply to their calculations. Let's dissect this act of nature and examine its anatomy. And we'll start with the very heart of their argument, the nature of micrometeoroids at Lagrange point 2. The official view, which you'll hear in any planetarium, sounds convincing. The solar system is not a sterile space. It's a giant, dusty house we live in. The primary source of this dust is the so-called zodiacal cloud, a massive, flattened disk of particles orbiting the sun in roughly the same plane as the planets, the ecliptic plane. These are the leftovers from the building materials that formed Earth, Mars, and Jupiter billions of years ago. Most of these particles are tiny, the size of smoke particles, but some can be as large as grains of sand or even small pebbles. They travel on their own orbits around the sun at speeds of tens of kilometers per second. When Earth, on its journey, crosses a denser swarm of these particles left by a passing comet, we see meteor showers, the Perseids in August, the Leonids in November. The James Webb Telescope, located at L2, is also flying through this cloud. Engineers at NASA's Meteoroid Environment Office in Huntsville, Alabama, created incredibly complex models to predict the density of this dust at any point in the solar system. They knew that impacts would happen. They even calculated their approximate frequency, several minor impacts per month and one more significant one, like the one in May, about once every few years. To prepare for this, they conducted ground tests. They took samples of the beryllium mirrors with their gold coating, exactly like those on the telescope, and shot them in vacuum chambers with tiny projectiles accelerated to hypersonic speeds. They studied the craters, analyzed the cracks, and modeled how the shock wave propagated through the fragile structure. They programmed the telescope to withstand these impacts and compensate for their effects. In other words, they were ready. Their model was complete, comprehensive, and based on decades of observations and experiments. A micrometeoroid strike was an expected event. It was a known variable in the great equation of spaceflight. And it is here, in this flawless, calibrated picture of the world, that the first detail that doesn't fit appears. A detail so fundamental that it calls into question the entire edifice of their argument. It is the direction. Imagine you're walking in the rain. You expect the drops to fall on your head and shoulders. You raise an umbrella to protect yourself. The umbrella is your shield. The James Webb Space Telescope has such an umbrella. A giant 5-layer sunshield the size of a tennis court. It is always, without exception, pointed towards the sun, earth, and moon. It protects the fragile mirrors and instruments not only from light and heat, but also from the main bulk of micrometeoroids. After all, most particles of the zodiacal cloud orbit the sun in roughly the same plane as the telescope. They move on predictable orbits. Thus, the overwhelming majority of impacts should hit this shield, or the underside of the telescope, its belly. The mirrors, looking out into the cold, dark void in the opposite direction from the sun, should be relatively safe. It's like walking in the rain. But for some reason, the drops are hitting you in the face, not from above, but horizontally, from the exact point you are looking at. Yes, there are particles in retrograde or highly inclined orbits that can come from the wrong direction, but their number is negligible. the probability of such an event is thousands of times lower than the probability of an impact from the primary direction. Now, let's recall what the telescope was doing at the moment of impact. It wasn't just looking at a random point in the sky. It was focused on a specific target, the interstellar object 3I Atlas. Its optics were aimed at it with the highest precision, and the impact came straight from the front. The particle that damaged segment C3 came from the exact direction the telescope was looking. Let's grasp the full statistical monstrosity of this coincidence. For the official version to be true, we must believe in the following chain of events. First, a random particle of cosmic dust, belonging to an extremely rare class of objects with a retrograde or interstellar trajectory, entered our solar system. Second, its trajectory happened to perfectly align with the position of the James Webb Space Telescope in space. Third, the moment of its arrival at L2 perfectly coincided with the moment the telescope was turned with its mirrors facing directly towards it. And fourth, the most incredible part, the direction from which it came was the exact same direction where another, much larger and more mysterious interstellar object, the very target of observation, was located. This is not just unlikely. This is a scenario that violates every principle of common sense and statistical analysis. Imagine two rifles located millions of kilometers apart. One of them fires in a random direction, and at that exact moment, the second rifle, also firing in a random direction, fires a bullet that collides with the first bullet precisely halfway. The probability of this is vanishingly small. Now imagine the second rifle is not a rifle, but an eye, and the bullet hits it squarely in the pupil at the very moment that eye is looking at the first rifle. This is no longer a random event. This is a targeted shot. And the system is trying to convince us it was just a cosmic ricochet. But the crack in their story deepens when we start to analyze not just where and when, but also what. What exactly was this impact? In one of the technical reports, published much later than the main press release and not widely covered, there's a very strange phrase. The engineers note that the impact energy was significantly higher than our models predicted for a particle of this size. This admission, buried deep within a multi-page document, is the key to everything. The system admits, we encountered something that doesn't fit our calculations. What does this mean in practice? More energy means either more mass or more velocity. If it was just a larger particle, that explains nothing. It only worsens the statistical anomaly. But if it was a particle with a much higher velocity, that opens up entirely new, disturbing possibilities. The typical velocities of micrometeoroids in our system are between 20 and 70 kilometers per second, about 45,000 to 157,000 miles per hour. For the energy to be significantly higher, the velocity must have been extreme, 100, 200, or maybe even more kilometers per second. Such speeds are characteristic of interstellar objects, which fly into our system carrying the momentum of their motion around the galactic center. And this brings us back to 3I Atlas. The source of the impact was not just in the same direction. It had similar dynamic characteristics. They were related. However, the strangest detail lies in the very nature of the damage. Look at the publicly available images of the damaged segment C3. We see a small, well-defined crater. Officially, this is called the point of impact. But if you talk to physicists specializing in hypervelocity impacts, they will tell you the picture looks odd. When a solid body collides with a surface at such speeds, an explosion occurs. The shock wave propagates through the material, causing an effect called spallation, the chipping of small fragments from the backside or around the edges of the crater. There should have been a whole network of microcracks, a spider web of damage around the main point. The impact should have been dirty. But what we see looks clean. Too clean. as if the mirror wasn't hit by a rock, but poked with a red-hot needle. The damage looks more like the result of thermal or energetic effects rather than purely kinetic ones. It resembles a pinpoint burn, the mark of a focused beam that instantly vaporized the thin layer of gold and damaged the beryllium substrate. This hypothesis seems fantastic, but it explains both the excess energy and the strange, localized nature of the damage much better than the theory of a simple, too fast rock. We're not seeing the mark of a shotgun blast. We're seeing the mark of a laser. And this is where someone the system will never acknowledge takes the stage. The Oracle's voice. In our case, it's not one person, but a whole community. A decentralized network of amateur astronomers scattered across the globe. These people, driven by pure curiosity, spend their nights, their money, their time looking at the sky. They don't have multi-billion-dollar budgets, but they have something large institutions often lack: flexibility, independence, and thousands of eyes looking at different points simultaneously. While Webb was conducting its calibration on 3i Atlas, dozens of these enthusiasts around the world were doing the same thing with their modest telescopes. They were tracking the faint interstellar guest, trying to catch any changes in its brightness or behavior. One of them was a man named Stefan Burns, a systems administrator from Germany, with a small private observatory in his backyard. On the night of May 23rd to 24th, he, like many others, aimed his 20-inch telescope at 3i Atlas. He didn't expect to see anything special, just another series of images for his collection. But when news of Webb's damage became public weeks later and closed astronomy forums began to discuss that same strange coincidence, Stefan went back to his archives. He began to meticulously examine pixel by pixel the images taken that very night. And he found it. On a single frame, shot with a timestamp that matched the time of the impact on Webb to within a few seconds, an anomaly was recorded. The object, 3i Atlas, momentarily became slightly brighter. It was a tiny, barely perceptible flash, lasting for a fraction of a second, just above the background noise. For most automated processing software, this would have been a mere glitch, a cosmic ray hitting the sensor, an artifact. But Stefan was thorough. He compared this frame to hundreds of others taken before and after. The flash was unique. It was real, and it happened at the exact same moment. When Stefan Burns published his findings on a forum, he was initially ridiculed, but then other amateurs around the world started checking their archives, and two others, one in Arizona and another in Chile, found confirmation. They too had recorded this faint, instantaneous flash. 3 independent observers, separated by thousands of kilometers, saw the same thing. Something that the system didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. And now, all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. The James Webb is looking at 3i Atlas. At that moment, something hits its mirror, flying from the exact direction of 3i Atlas. The impact energy exceeds all calculations. The nature of the damage doesn't look kinetic. And at the very same second, independent observers on Earth record an energy flash emanating from 3i Atlas itself. The conclusion that presents itself is both simple and monstrous. The micrometeoroid was not a random traveler. It didn't exist at all. The particle that damaged Webb was fired by the object 3i Atlas itself. It wasn't a rock. It was a pulse. It wasn't a blind act of nature. It was a shot. And the problem wasn't that NASA's model was wrong. The problem was that they encountered an event that was beyond their imagination. And having encountered it, they made a choice. Not to tell the truth, but to create a convenient lie. They didn't just hide the target of observation. They hid the true shooter. And that changes absolutely everything. Realizing that the impact on the James Webb was not an accident, but a targeted shot, is only the first step down the rabbit hole. It changes the rules of the game, but it doesn't explain its essence. To understand what really happened, we must shift our focus. We must stop looking at the physical damage, at that tiny scar on the golden mirror, and start looking for the ghost. The ghost in the machine. The digital trace of what the system is so desperately trying to hide. Because in our digital universe, the most compelling evidence is not what is there, but what is not. A gap, a void. A perfectly calibrated hole in the data stream whose shape and location scream about what it's concealing. And this hole exists. We just need to know where to look. To understand its nature, you must imagine the journey of information. It is an odyssey no less spectacular than the flight of the telescope itself. When photons that left 3I Atlas many hours ago reach L2, they enter a highly complex optical system. After passing through the primary and secondary mirrors, they are focused and directed to one of 4 scientific instruments. In our case, since the purpose was calibration, several were likely operating, but the key ones were the near-infrared camera, NIR-CAM, and the near-infrared spectrograph, NIR-SPEC. These instruments are not just cameras, they are miniature science laboratories. They don't just take a picture, they dissect the light. Detectors cooled to minus 266 degrees Celsius, minus 447 degrees Fahrenheit, register every single photon. This information, pure, raw knowledge, is converted into digital signals, into a stream of ones and zeros. This is what engineers call level 0 data. It's not an image, it's just numbers. Billions of numbers. This precious cargo is transmitted to Earth as a radio signal, where it is caught by the giant dishes of NASA's Deep Space Network in California, Spain, or Australia. From there, via secure fiber optic channels, the data arrives at the heart of the mission, the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. And only there, in massive server rooms, do special software pipelines, algorithms written by hundreds of astrophysicists and programmers, begin to transform this chaos of numbers into something we can understand. Calibrated images, spectral graphs, scientific knowledge. This process takes hours, sometimes days, and at every stage, files, logs, and reports are created. Every bit of information leaves a trace. According to the protocols of scientific openness that NASA has followed for decades, all this data, from the rawest to the fully processed, should eventually end up in the public massed archive. For scientific programs proposed by specific scientists, there is a so-called proprietary period, usually a year, during which only they have access to the data to make their discoveries and publish papers. But for calibration and engineering data, the rules are different. They often become publicly available much faster because they don't contain exclusive scientific information, but serve to verify the telescope's performance. They are supposed to be transparent. And this is where we find our ghost. If you go to the massed archive today and enter the observation parameters for 3I Atlas for that exact time interval, May 24th, 2022, 0011, you will find everything you expect. You'll find the schedule files. You'll find the engineering logs showing the telescope's position. You'll even find the very telemetry records of the unscheduled correction of mirror C3. Everything is there. Everything is transparent. Except for one thing. The most important thing. The scientific data itself. The files that should contain the very stream of photons registered by the detectors in the seconds and minutes before the impact are marked with a status you won't find in any public archive manual. The status isn't processing, not proprietary, and not even read error. The status is quarantined. This is a word from the lexicon of biologists and medics, not astronomers. A dangerous virus is placed under quarantine to prevent its spread. An infected computer is quarantined to isolate malicious code. In the context of astronomical data, This word has no official meaning. It does not exist. It's a bureaucratic ghost created specifically for this case. What does this mean in practice? It means the data exists. It wasn't lost during transmission. It wasn't destroyed by the impact. It's sitting on a server somewhere in Baltimore, but access to it is blocked, isolated, placed behind a digital firewall that is invisible to the outside world. This is the architecture of silence. They didn't just delete the files. That would have been too crude, leaving obvious traces. Instead, they created a black hole in the archive by assigning the data a non-existent status that doesn't trigger standard errors or attract the attention of automated monitoring systems. It was a quiet, elegant act of concealment, designed on the assumption that no one would notice. But we noticed. And now the main question is, why? What could be contained in a few seconds of calibration observations that required such unprecedented measures for their isolation? Ordinary interference, detector artifacts, even the dirtiest and noisiest data is always preserved. It's invaluable for engineers to understand how the instrument works. Packet loss during transmission? There are recovery protocols for that, and even incomplete data is still archived with appropriate notes. There is no known technical reason why absolutely all scientific data obtained immediately before an anomalous event should be placed in complete, impenetrable isolation. Only one possibility remains. The reason was not technical. It was substantive. And here, we must formulate a hypothesis. A hypothesis that the system would call an absurd conspiracy theory, but which is the only one that logically explains all the available facts. The targeted nature of the impact, the anomalous energy, the strange character of the damage, the flash observed from Earth, and finally, this digital sarcophagus in which the last moments of Webb's pre-impact life were placed. The hypothesis is this: they saw something. In the last 3 seconds before the energy pulse from 3I Atlas struck the telescope, its instruments managed to register something. Something so important, so alien, that the system made the decision to classify it at the deepest level, not just to hide it from the public, but from most of the scientific community itself. What could it have been? A simple image is unlikely. In 3 seconds, Webb wouldn't have collected enough light to get a clear picture of an object as faint as 3I Atlas. The image would have been noisy, indistinct. No, the answer must lie elsewhere. In what Webb is best designed for. In spectroscopy. A spectrograph, like NIRSpec, is a magical instrument. It does what no eye and no camera can. It takes the light from a distant object and splits it into a rainbow. A spectrum. But this rainbow is far more complex than the one we see after a rainstorm. It has dark and bright lines, absorption and emission lines. This is a unique barcode, a chemical fingerprint of the object. Each line corresponds to a specific atom or molecule. From a spectrum, we can tell what a star millions of light years away is made of. We can determine the composition of a planet's atmosphere in another star system. The spectrum is the language of the universe. And Webb is our best translator. Now imagine. Webb is pointed at 3I Atlas. Suddenly the object emits that brief flash recorded on Earth. This flash is a concentrated stream of energy. And this stream flies directly into the telescope's lens. In the fraction of a second it takes to travel, the NIRSpec spectrograph manages to catch it. It manages to split this light into a spectrum and record it. A moment later, this very same pulse strikes mirror C3, causing physical damage and cutting off the data stream. What if the corrupted and quarantined data is this very spectrum? The spectrum of the weapon itself, of the pulse fired by the interstellar object. What could this spectrum have shown? If it were just reflected sunlight from an ejected rock, the spectrum would be boring and predictable. It would show the presence of silicates, carbon, water ice, the usual building materials for comets and asteroids. Such information does not require quarantine. But what if the spectrum showed something completely different? What if it revealed lines corresponding to no known element or isotope? What if it showed the presence of transuranic elements that on Earth can only be created in nuclear reactors and which decay in fractions of a second? But there, in that pulse, they were stable? What if the structure of the spectrum indicated not natural radiation, but an artificial one? A coherent, modulated signal, like a laser? What if the spectrum showed an energy peak of such incredible density and specific frequency that it pointed to a power source based on physics we are only beginning to theorize about, like annihilation or vacuum energy? To obtain such a spectrum is not just to prove that 3i Atlas is an artificial object. It means getting your hands on the technological blueprint of its power system. It means understanding how it moves, what it shoots with, what it's made of. This knowledge, this is the most dangerous and most valuable knowledge humanity has ever received. It's Pandora's box, opened at a distance of 1.5 million kilometers from Earth. And the system, having peeked inside, slammed the lid shut in horror. They hid the data not because they feared public panic. They hid it because they realized what they had encountered. A technology that is thousands, perhaps millions, of years ahead of ours. A technology capable of directing a focused energy pulse across millions of kilometers with absolute precision. And they understood that we were not just observers. We were noticed. Our curiosity was perceived as, perhaps, a threat. Or even worse, as something so insignificant that it could simply be switched off, like we swat away an annoying insect. The missing data is not just a gap in the archive. It is the record of first contact. And this contact was not a friendly handshake. It was a warning shot. Or maybe not even a warning. Maybe just a scanning pulse. A cold, indifferent act of information gathering. And now, this ghost, this digital imprint of an alien mind, is locked away on a server in Baltimore. And the system is doing everything to ensure no one ever gets to see it. When an investigation hits a wall, when the direct path to the truth is blocked by the impenetrable will of the system, a seeker has only one option left: to find the detours, to look for cracks not in the wall itself, but in the ground beneath it, to seek out those who have been cast out of the fortress but took the blueprints with them. In a world where information is power, the most dangerous leak doesn't come from hacked servers, but from wounded pride. From a single person whom the system deemed insignificant, wrote off, but forgot that they took with them the most important thing: knowledge of its secrets and weaknesses. The information fortress built around the James Webb incident seemed impregnable. The data was quarantined. The official story was simple and clear, and the scientific community obediently accepted it to move on. But they overlooked one person. They overlooked Dr. Eris Thorne. You won't find the name Eris Thorne on any list of key personnel for the JWST mission. He doesn't work for NASA. Officially, he no longer works in big science at all. Thorne is a ghost, a genius of digital archaeology who was quietly, without any fanfare, dismissed a few years ago from the European Space Astronomy Center, ESAC, in Madrid, one of the key hubs of the European Space Agency. His official specialty was the analysis and correction of errors in telemetry streams from spacecraft. In simple terms, his job was to separate real signals from noise, from interference caused by cosmic rays, electronic glitches, and solar wind. He was a cleaner, a digital janitor whose task was to ensure the pristine quality of data for the real astrophysicists. But Thorne was obsessed. He believed that within this garbage, in these discarded artifacts and glitches, lay patterns. He saw in the chaos of anomalous signals not just random errors, but a faint, barely discernible language. A language in which the universe itself, or something else, was speaking to us. His superiors considered this an eccentricity, a waste of resources. They forced him to follow protocols, to run standard filters that automatically found and deleted these errors. But Thorne secretly copied them. He created a personal, shadow archive of these impossible signals, collected over decades from European missions, from Herschel to Gaia. He searched them for recurring patterns, signatures, something that defied statistical randomness. This was the reason for his dismissal. When his collection was discovered, it was deemed a violation of security protocols and a misuse of computational resources. He was labeled an eccentric paranoid and politely shown the door. The system cast him out, not realizing it had created its most dangerous enemy. Because Eris Thorne didn't just leave. He left with the keys. Not passwords, but a deep, intuitive understanding of how the system processes, filters, and most importantly, buries inconvenient information. And when the James Webb story broke, Thorne knew exactly where to dig. Our contact with him was like a scene from a spy thriller. It wasn't an interview. It was the receipt of an encrypted data packet through a secure channel, accompanied by a single sentence. They used the same filter again. Look in the FGS data. They always forget about the FGS. FGS. The Fine Guidance Sensor. This is not a scientific instrument in the usual sense. It is a service system, the eyes and nerves of the telescope. To take an ultra-sharp image of a distant galaxy with an exposure of several hours, Webb must remain absolutely still relative to its target, with an accuracy of millionths of a degree. To do this, it uses the FGS. It's a separate camera that locks onto a bright guide star near the main observation target. Even the slightest shift of this star on the FGS detector is immediately registered, and the onboard computer sends corrective pulses to the gyroscopes and thrusters, returning the telescope to its perfect position. The FGS is the workhorse, the tireless guardian ensuring stability. Its data is an endless, monotonous stream of numbers showing the brightness and precise coordinates of the guide star. For scientists, this stream is of no interest. It's service telemetry, noise that is filtered out at the earliest stages of processing. And that is precisely why, as Thorne claimed, it is the perfect place to hide or accidentally overlook a clue. The system focused all its efforts on isolating the data from the main scientific instruments in NIRCam and NIRSpec. They created a quarantine for the grand prize. But they forgot about the humble janitor who was standing nearby and saw everything. The packet Thorne sent us was tiny, a few kilobytes. It was a fragment of data from Webb's FGS for the very time interval that interested us. How did he get it? Thorne still had contacts, engineers within ESA who sympathized with him and also felt his dismissal was unfair. One of them, having access to the low-level data streams, simply copied this fragment for him, which ESA's automatic filtering system had flagged as an erroneous packet, not for archival, and prepared for deletion. It was digital trash about to be taken out. When we opened the file, it looked exactly as it should. A graph of the guide star's brightness. An almost perfectly straight line, confirming the telescope's incredible stability. Second after second, the line was as flat as the surface of a frozen lake. And then, at the point corresponding to 0:11:34, the line vanished. In its place was a vertical spike, a needle that pierced the graph and shot far beyond the scale. An instantaneous, absolutely vertical jump in brightness, thousands of times greater than the brightness of the guide star itself. And in the next fraction of a second, the graph returned to its perfect straight line, as if nothing had happened. What was this? The official explanation, if any engineer had even noticed it, would have been simple and immediate. A high-energy particle, a cosmic ray hitting a pixel on the FGS detector directly. This is a common occurrence in space. A proton, ejected from the sun, or an exploding supernova, pierces the electronics, causing an instantaneous surge of charge that is registered as a false spike in brightness. The automatic filters, the very ones Thorne despised, are programmed to find such spikes, solitary, sharp, needle-like, and remove them from the data, interpolating the value from adjacent points. For the system, this was a classic example of an error, garbage to be cleaned up. But Eris Thorne showed us why this was not the case. He zoomed in on the spike. He stretched that fraction of a second, breaking it down into thousandths. And what we saw did not look like a cosmic ray hit. A particle strike is a chaotic, dirty process. It creates a sharp, jagged, irregularly shaped spike on the graph. But this spike, it was perfect. It had a clear, symmetrical structure. It consisted of a phase of ultra-fast signal rise, a very short plateau at its peak, and then an equally fast but slightly smoother decay phase. This was not a needle. It was a pulse, a perfect, mathematically precise energy pulse. It had form, structure, architecture. This was not noise. It was a signal. Thorne went further. He explained what the FGS had actually seen. The sensor was not aimed at 3I Atlas itself, but at the guide star next to it. But when 3I Atlas fired its energy pulse, it was so powerful and perhaps not perfectly focused that its light, its aura, its energetic echo momentarily illuminated the entire field of view. The FGS detector was blinded by this stray radiation. It didn't register the light of the star. It registered the light of the shot itself, reflected off the internal structures of the telescope. It was the afterglow of the flash, the digital fingerprint of the weapon, and this fingerprint contained information. Using complex algorithms, Thorne was able to perform a semblance of spectral analysis on this tiny, distorted signal. The data was incredibly noisy, at the very limit of analysis. But even in this noise, ghosts emerged. The ghost of an incredibly high color temperature, indicating a power source beyond anything we know. The ghost of emission lines in parts of the spectrum where they shouldn't be, hinting at an exotic composition of matter. It was a faint, distorted echo of the very spectrum we hypothesized was recorded by the main NIRSpec instrument and now lies in quarantine. Thorne's proof was not direct, but it was undeniable. It was like a shell casing found at a crime scene that perfectly matches the caliber of the bullet lodged in the wall. We can't see the bullet itself, but we know it's there. And here, when we were already stunned by this discovery, Eris Thorne delivered the final, devastating blow. He said he found this pulse not because he was specifically looking for it in Webb's data. He found it because he had seen it before. He was looking for it because he knew its signature. Several years ago, while still at ESA, he was analyzing archival data from the Kepler telescope, the famous planet hunter that stared motionlessly at the same patch of sky for years. In the data from 2016, he had discovered an unexplained anomaly. One day, the telescope suddenly lost its orientation. It had to be put into safe mode and reconfigured. The official cause was a malfunction in one of its reaction wheels. But Thorne, digging through the engineering telemetry, found something else. A few milliseconds before the malfunction, Kepler's fine guidance sensors had recorded the exact same impossible pulse, perfect in shape, with incredible energy. At the time, it was simply written off as an even stranger electronic glitch because it coincided with the main anomaly. But Thorne saved it in his collection. And when he saw the pulse in Webb's data, he understood. These were not two different, unrelated glitches. It was the same handwriting, the same signature. What we saw on May 24th, 2022, was not a unique event. It was not first contact. It was merely the latest episode in a series of events that have been happening for a long time. The anomaly that damaged Webb wasn't just an anomaly. It was a signature that someone or something is leaving in our system as it passes through. And now we know this signature is not alone. They are scattered throughout our digital archives, like markers on a map, waiting for someone who can read them. The investigation into the James Webb incident has just expanded beyond a single event. It has become a hunt for a ghost that has been haunting us for years. When you have not one, but two identical anomalies in your hands, separated by years and hundreds of millions of miles, the investigation elevates to a new level. It's no longer the analysis of a single incident. It becomes cartography, the mapping of ghostly trails left in our archives. The task changes. It's not just to prove that an event happened, but to understand its logic, its rhythm, its choreography. If Eris Thorne was right, and an identical energy pulse was recorded by the Kepler telescope in 2016, then that gives us a second point on the map of time and space. And 2 points make a vector, a direction, an opportunity to trace the source's path and perhaps even predict where it will appear next. The most exciting and simultaneously terrifying phase of our hunt begins, connecting the dots, scattered across different eras and missions, into a single, frighteningly coherent picture. We begin to build the conspiracy map, or, to be more precise, the map of presence. The first step is to reconstruct the past, the Kepler incident. The official version, published by NASA in April 2016, was concise. The telescope, in its heliocentric orbit, suddenly entered emergency mode. It took engineers several days of intense work to restore communication and bring the spacecraft back online. The cause of the failure was cited as issues with the reaction wheels, the gyroscopic devices responsible for the telescope's orientation. It was a plausible, albeit somewhat vague explanation. Kepler was an old spacecraft, and 2 of its 4 reaction wheels had already failed years earlier, forcing engineers to devise the ingenious K2 mission, using solar light pressure for stabilization. But the pulse Thorne found changes everything. It preceded the reaction wheel failure. It was the root cause, not the consequence. An external energy strike disabled the sensitive electronics, leading to a cascading failure of the orientation systems. The system, again, just as with Webb, chose the simplest and least alarming explanation, a technical malfunction, hiding the true trigger. Now we have 2 events, April 2016 and May 2022. What unites them, besides the identical energy signature? The answer lies in the trajectories. We know where the James Webb was at the moment of impact, at L2. We know where Kepler was in 2016. Now we must overlay the trajectory of 3I Atlas onto this picture. When we do, the picture becomes crystal clear. In May 2022, 3I Atlas was in the immediate vicinity of Webb, which explains the direct hit. But if we rewind its hyperbolic trajectory back in time, to April 2016, we see something astonishing. At that moment, 3I Atlas was in a completely different part of the solar system, far from Kepler. This seems to destroy our theory, but only if we think in terms of a single object. What if 3I Atlas is not a lone wanderer? What if it's just one of many? What if we are dealing not with a single ship, but with a fleet, or rather, a distributed, decentralized network of probes entering our system on different trajectories but acting in sync? This idea may seem fantastic, but it elegantly explains what is otherwise inexplicable. The pulse that struck Kepler was not emitted by 3I Atlas itself, but by another, similar object that passed through our system 6 years earlier, remaining undetected. Why undetected? Because in 2016, We didn't have powerful survey telescopes like Pan-STARRS or the Atlas system, which now scan the entire sky every night. We were nearly blind. A twin to 3I Atlas could have flown by, leaving only that single digital scar in Kepler's data, and vanished forever into the interstellar void. This hypothesis forces us to look further. If there were two such objects, were there perhaps others? We must re-examine all the unexplained failures and anomalies in the history of space exploration. And when we begin this search, new, disturbing coincidences come to light. Take, for example, the mysterious incident with the Mars Valiant probe in November 2011. This American mission, designed to bring back soil samples from the Martian surface, failed to fire its main engines after a successful launch to leave Earth orbit. It remained trapped, helplessly circling the Earth until it burned up in the atmosphere. Official theories range from a software bug to the effects of a powerful US military radar. But what if the cause was different? The European Space Agency was tracking the spacecraft, and one strange detail appeared in their reports. Moments before the scheduled engine burn, telemetry from the probe became noisy and unstable. Could this have been the result of another such energy pulse, which damaged the onboard electronics at the most critical moment? The trajectory of 3I Atlas in 2011 was still far beyond the orbit of Neptune. But what if its predecessor, the Valiant Killer, was passing through the inner solar system at that time? The picture begins to emerge. These are not isolated events. This is a dotted line stretching back at least a decade. 2011, Mars Valiant. 2016, Kepler. 2022, James Webb. The interval between events is roughly 5 to 6 years. It feels like a rhythm, a schedule, as if unseen probes are entering our system with a certain periodicity, carrying out some program. And each time, their presence somehow affects our most advanced and sensitive instruments. Coincidence? Or is this part of their mission? Perhaps they are deliberately pinging our spacecraft to study them. Or do their actions have a side effect that we perceive as failures? In any case, we can no longer speak of separate anomalies. We are talking about a systemic, recurring phenomenon, a pattern. And this is where we must bring in that very artifact from the past that gives this whole structure historical depth and a chilling scale, the WOW signal. August 15th, 1977. The Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University recorded a powerful narrow-band radio signal lasting 72 seconds. It came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It had all the hallmarks of an artificial extraterrestrial signal. It was so striking that astronomer Jerry Eman, reviewing the printouts, circled it in red pen and wrote that one word in the margin: "Wow." The signal never repeated. Decades of searching in the same direction yielded nothing. The WOW signal became the holy grail for SETI enthusiasts and a constant reminder of our possible solitude. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place and for the wrong thing all this time? We were looking for a radio transmission, a message intended for us. What if it wasn't a shout of, "We are here," but simply engine noise? What if in 1977, another such object, one of the predecessors of 3I Atlas, flew through our solar system, and its power plant or scanning system produced incidental radiation in the radio band, which we happened to pick up? Let's test this hypothesis. The trajectory of 3I Atlas, if extrapolated far into the past, does not align with the direction of Sagittarius. But that's not required. If we are dealing with a whole swarm of objects entering the system from different directions, then one of them could well have come from there. This idea gives the WOW mystery a new, sinister undertone. It wasn't a handshake. It was the sound of a passing train we heard from our window, not knowing what kind of train it was or where it was headed. And if this connection is correct, then they have been here for at least half a century. They fly by, perhaps on a schedule every few years, carrying out their incomprehensible mission. They observe, they scan, and sometimes, accidentally or intentionally, their presence disables our fragile technologies. The picture that emerges is both grand and terrifying. Our solar system is not our quiet, secluded home. It is a busy highway, or rather, a national park, periodically visited by rangers invisible to the local wildlife. They study us, catalog us, perhaps even monitor our development. From the Big Ear in 77 to the James Webb in 22, we see not isolated anomalies, but an evolution of their interaction with us. At first, they were just noisy, and we happened to overhear. Then, as our technologies became more complex and reached into space, their presence began to cause failures. And now, as we have deployed our sharpest eye and pointed it directly at them, they have responded with a pinpoint, surgically precise strike that did not destroy, but merely blinded us for a moment. It was not an attack. It was a demonstration. A demonstration of technological superiority and perhaps displeasure with our excessive curiosity. And this is where the central node of the map appears, the organization that seems to be conducting the orchestra of silence. It's not NASA or ESA individually. All threads lead to a higher supranational level, to the International Astronomical Union, IAU, and its associated UN committees responsible for space law and post-detection protocols. It is the IAU that is responsible for classifying and naming all celestial bodies, including interstellar objects. It was they who gave 3i Atlas its official name. But in recent years, strange things have been observed in their activities. Protocols concerning the observation of anomalous objects have been quietly, without wide publicity, updated. New vague formulations have appeared about the need for cautious verification and coordinated information response in the event of discovering, potentially, artificial signatures. At first glance, these are reasonable precautions. But in practice, they create a bureaucratic mechanism to control and delay the publication of inconvenient data. Now, if any observatory discovers something like 3i Atlas, it is obliged to first notify a special committee at the IAU before making public statements. This gives the system precious time to assess the threat, develop a unified information policy, and, if necessary, prepare a smokescreen, as was done in the case of the James Webb. They are not building a conspiracy in the classic sense. They are building an architecture of control. They are creating an information gateway through which only carefully filtered and safe truth can pass. And the Webb incident was their first major test of this system. And by all accounts, they believe they handled it successfully. They don't yet know that we are looking at their map. And on it, we see not only the past, but possibly the future. When the contours of the conspiracy become clear, when the scattered dots on the map connect into a recognizable pattern, the investigation inevitably arrives at the most fundamental, most human question. Cui bono? Who benefits? Why does the system, this impersonal conglomerate of scientific institutions, government agencies, and supranational committees, go to such extraordinary lengths to hide the truth? Why build this complex architecture of silence, risking its reputation and undermining the very foundations of scientific openness? The answer to this question leads us from the cold void of space into the stuffy rooms where science, politics, and the psychology of power intertwine. The truth about the system's motives is far more complex and disturbing than a simple desire to avoid global panic. Panic is just a surface symptom. The real reasons for the cover-up lie much deeper, at the very heart of our civilization. Let's start with the official, or rather, semi-official viewpoint, which high-ranking officials might share with you in a private conversation if you could get them to be candid. This is the responsible guardian argument. From this perspective, humanity is a child, curious, intelligent, but emotionally unstable, and not ready for some of the harsh truths about the world it lives in. The system, then, is the adult, the parent who knows best. And they would tell you, imagine that tomorrow, on every screen in the world, irrefutable proof of extraterrestrial intelligence appears. Not just intelligence, but a technology that surpasses ours as a stealth fighter surpasses a Stone Age spear. What happens? First, shock. Then, a wave of existential dread. All the world's religions, built on the idea of human uniqueness and our special place in the universe, would be threatened. Their foundations would crumble. Billions of believers would face a crisis of faith that could lead to unpredictable social consequences, from mass conversions to new space cults, to fundamentalist riots against demonic science. The economy? Global markets would collapse overnight. Who would invest in long-term projects on Earth when a Damocles sword in the form of an incomprehensible and potentially hostile force hangs overhead? Our entire economic model, based on forecasting and faith in the future, would lose its meaning. Politics? Nation-states, the entire concept of sovereignty, would lose their legitimacy. What's the point of borders and armies when the real power is out there, in space? This would lead either to a desperate militaristic consolidation of humanity under some world government, or more likely, to complete chaos as each country tries to make a separate deal with the aliens, offering its resources in exchange for technology or security. From the responsible guardian's point of view, revealing the truth is lighting the fuse on a powder keg. It's irresponsible. The truth is a luxury we cannot yet afford. Therefore, it must be rationed, revealed slowly, in pieces, preparing society over decades through science fiction, vague hints, and the gradual expansion of the Overton window. And the Webb incident is precisely a case where the adults decided the child was not ready. The truth was too harsh, too specific, so it was replaced with a soothing fairy tale about a speck of dust. It's not a lie. It's an act of mercy. This argument is strong in its logic and even a certain degree of humanism, but it's based on one fundamental assumption, that the system is acting in the best interests of all humanity. What if it's not? What if its true motives are not concern for our peace of mind, but a desire to preserve its own power and control? This is the second alternative viewpoint, cynical, but perhaps more realistic. Power in our world is based on knowledge. He who controls information controls reality. Scientific institutions like NASA hold a monopoly on cosmic truth. Governments hold a monopoly on legitimate violence and security. Religious institutions on spiritual truth. The appearance of a real, provable extraterrestrial factor shatters all these monopolies. The scientific establishment, which has spent decades building its models of the universe, would find itself in the role of medieval scholastics to whom Galileo showed the moons of Jupiter. Their authority would be undermined. Governments, unable to either protect their citizens from a new threat or establish contact with it, would reveal their complete impotence. Their power would evaporate. Religions would lose their flock. The entire existing power structure, the edifice built over thousands of years, would collapse, and those at the top of this pyramid would lose everything. The cover-up, from this perspective, is not an act of mercy. It's an act of self-preservation. The system is not protecting us. It is protecting itself. They are hiding the truth not because they fear our reaction, but because they fear losing their status, their budgets, their influence. They are trying to keep the world in a familiar, manageable paradigm for as long as possible. They are playing for time, desperately trying to figure out how to adapt the new, shocking reality to their own interests. How to privatize contact. How to make it their exclusive resource. To understand how plausible this version is, we don't have to look far for examples. The history of the 20th century is one long chronicle of government cover-ups motivated precisely by the preservation of power and strategic advantage. Recall the Manhattan Project. Tens of thousands worked on the atomic bomb in complete secrecy. The U.S. government hid the truth not only from its enemies, but from the vast majority of its own citizens and even politicians. The motive? Not preventing panic, but gaining an absolute military advantage. After the war, when the truth came out, this knowledge didn't destroy the world. It created a new reality. The reality of the Cold War, of nuclear deterrence. But the key was that the system controlled this transition. It managed the narrative. Or remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. President Johnson's administration presented false information to Congress about an unprovoked attack by North Vietnamese torpedo boats on American destroyers to get a blank check for a full-scale invasion of Vietnam. It was a cynical manipulation motivated by geopolitical interests. And Project MKUltra? The CIA's secret program to find methods of mind control in which unsuspecting citizens were subjected to cruel experiments with psychotropic drugs and torture. All of this was hidden for decades under the cloak of national security. History teaches us one thing again and again. When power, security, and technological superiority are at stake, the system does not hesitate to resort to lies and concealment. Why should we believe it would act any differently in the case of the most important discovery in human history? From this perspective, hiding the information about 3I Atlas is not an anomaly. It is standard operating procedure. But there is a third, deepest, and most disturbing viewpoint. A speculative one. What if the system is hiding the truth not to protect us from panic or itself from losing power, but to buy time? Time to prepare a response. What if they perceive the Webb incident not just as an anomaly or even a show of force, but as the opening move in a game whose rules we do not know? Put yourself in their shoes. You are a small group of people at the top of the intelligence and scientific community. You receive the data, that quarantine spectrum. You see in it proof of a technology beyond your comprehension. You realize you are being watched, and you know you've been scanned. The pulse that damaged Webb wasn't just a shot. It could have been a scanner. In a fraction of a second, it could have gathered all the information about our greatest creation, the materials of the mirrors, the principles of the detectors, the communication systems. They now know as much about us as we do, and maybe more. What would be your reaction? Tell the world? That would mean sowing chaos while simultaneously revealing all your cards to the opponent, showing them that you know they've detected you. It's strategic suicide. A much more logical move is to pretend nothing happened, publicly blame it on a speck of dust, and secretly launch the largest and most clandestine program in human history. A program to decrypt the received data. A program to create our own technologies based on this knowledge. A program to prepare for the next step, whatever it may be. The cover-up in this scenario is not a passive act. It's an active strategy. It's a smokescreen behind which frantic, desperate activity is unfolding. In secret labs, the planet's best minds may right now be trying to replicate the physics behind that energy pulse. In the depths of the NSA and other intelligence agencies, the best cryptanalysts are trying to find a meaningful message in the signal structure. And in the war rooms, strategists are developing scenarios. What do we do if they return? What if they make demands? What if they just ignore us? What if we are nothing more to them than an interesting biological sample in a petri dish? This version also explains the recent strange moves in the U.S. Congress, the hearings on unidentified anomalous phenomena, the creation of special offices in the Pentagon. To the public, It looks like a belated reaction to pilot stories about Tic Tacs. But what if it's just the tip of the iceberg? What if it's a carefully orchestrated show designed to legitimize huge, black budgets that are actually going not to study UFOs, but to that very secret project born from the Webb incident? They are not protecting us from panic. They are preparing us for war, or for something worse. They are hiding the truth because the knowledge of our real vulnerability would paralyze society's will to resist. They want to maintain the illusion of control until the very last moment, until the moment they can present the world not with a problem, but with a solution, their solution. And we can only guess what it will be. In this light, the system's silence becomes more than just a lie. It becomes the deafening tick of a clock. They have bought time, but what are they spending it on? And how much of it do we have left? When the motives for the cover-up become clear, the investigation must return to its source, to the anomaly itself, to this dark, cold wanderer we have named Three-Eye Atlas. Until now, we have spoken of it as a black box, a mysterious object whose actions we observe, but whose nature we do not understand. Now, armed with all the evidence we've gathered, from the targeted nature of the shot to its recurring energy signature, we must try to open this box. We must conduct a detailed, almost forensic analysis of Three-Eye Atlas, using all available, albeit scarce, data. We must discard the cautious hypotheses of official science and ask the most direct and bold question. If this is an artificial object, then how is it built and what is its purpose? This is a dive into the anatomy of the anomaly, into the very essence of an alien mind, reflected in the physics and mechanics of its creation. Let's start with what we know for sure, from ground-based observations. The first thing that stands out is its color, or rather, its absence. Three-Eye Atlas is one of the darkest objects ever observed in the solar system. Its albedo, or reflectivity, is extremely low. It absorbs over 97% of the sunlight that falls on it. This is darker than fresh asphalt, darker than coal. Such extreme blackness is rare in nature. Some primitive, carbon-rich asteroids in the Kuiper Belt can be very dark, but not to this extent. Official science offers an explanation. The object's surface may be covered with a thick layer of organic tholins, complex hydrocarbon compounds that form under the influence of cosmic radiation. It's a kind of cosmic tan. But what if this blackness is not an accidental byproduct, but a deliberate design feature? In modern military technology, a similar principle is used to create stealth coatings. Materials that absorb radio waves make aircraft and ships invisible to radar. What if Three-Eye Atlas is coated with a material designed to absorb not only radio waves, but light across the entire visible and infrared spectrum? It would be the perfect camouflage for interstellar travel, an object nearly impossible to spot against the black void of space until it reveals itself. This is not just a rock covered in soot. This is a stealth probe. Second is its shape. Unlike the famous Oumuamua, which based on its light curve, had an elongated cigar-like or disc-like shape, Three-Eye Atlas did not show significant periodic variations in brightness. This suggests it is either almost perfectly spherical or its axis of rotation was pointed directly at us, which is unlikely. A spherical shape for a natural object of its size, estimated diameter of several hundred meters, is atypical. Its gravity is too weak to shape it into a perfect ball. Asteroids and cometary nuclei usually have irregular potato-like shapes. A perfect sphere is a sign of either incredible coincidence or artificial manufacturing. A sphere is the most efficient shape for protection against external impacts and for uniform distribution of internal stresses. It is the optimal shape for a hull designed for long journeys in a hostile environment. But the biggest mystery is its movement. As we've mentioned, Three-Eye Atlas showed distinct non-gravitational acceleration. It moved as if something were constantly and very gently pushing it. The official version is outgassing, the sublimation of ices beneath the surface creating reactive thrust. This phenomenon is well known in comets. But 3I Atlas had no visible coma or tail, no visible emissions of gas or dust. Telescopes, including the most powerful observatories on Earth, detected no traces of cyanide or other molecules that usually accompany cometary activity. To explain this contradiction, scientists proposed an exotic hypothesis. Perhaps the object is made of solid hydrogen or nitrogen. These substances could sublimate while remaining invisible to our instruments. But creating an iceberg of solid hydrogen in nature is an extremely unlikely process, requiring unique, ultra-cold conditions that we believe do not exist in the interstellar medium. It is an explanation that creates more questions than answers. But what if it's much simpler? What if it's not outgassing? What if it's an engine? Not a roaring chemical engine like our rockets, but something entirely different. Quiet, efficient, almost invisible. It could be an ion engine of incredible power, using some inert gas as propellant. Or, more likely, given its technological level, it could be a drive based on interaction with space-time itself. For example, a so-called electromagnetic drive, EM drive, a hypothetical device that supposedly generates thrust without expelling reaction mass, violating the law of conservation of momentum in its classical sense. Or perhaps it's something even more exotic, a drive that uses solar light pressure, but not with a giant, fragile sail like in our designs, but through the direct conversion of photons into momentum on the object's surface. This solar machine would perfectly explain both its dark, light-absorbing color and its gentle, constant acceleration. It doesn't just fly through space, it sails on the waves of starlight. Now let's put all these pieces together. We have a spherical object, several hundred meters in diameter. It is covered with a super black material that absorbs almost all incident light, making it virtually invisible. It moves with the help of an unseen, highly efficient engine that allows it to perform subtle maneuvers and accelerate without visible emissions. And, as we know from the Webb incident, it is armed. It is capable of generating and directing focused energy pulses with surgical precision over vast distances. This is not just a rock. This is not just an observation probe. This is something that in our military terminology could be called an autonomous, multi-purpose reconnaissance strike platform. So, what is its purpose? Why was such a complex and perfect machine sent to our solar system? Here we enter the realm of pure speculation, but speculation based on everything we've learned. Version 1. Reconnaissance. This is the simplest and most obvious option. 3I Atlas and its brethren are von Neumann probes, self-replicating machines that travel from star to star, creating copies of themselves from local resources, asteroids, comets, and sending them further, until the entire galaxy is filled with their network. Their primary task is information gathering. They passively observe the development of life and technology in different systems. The Webb incident in this paradigm is a reaction to our own action. We poked at them with our most powerful microscope. They, in turn, poked back at us to scan our instrument and perhaps to let us know that we have been noticed and that our further curiosity should have its limits. This is a cold, almost robotic contact, devoid of any empathy. We are just an object of study for them. Version 2. More disturbing. Quarantine. What if their mission is not just to observe, but to contain? What if the galaxy is full of civilizations, and there are certain rules of the road? A galactic codex? One hypothesis explaining the Fermi paradox, the so-called dark forest hypothesis, states that any civilization that announces its presence risks being immediately destroyed by more advanced and paranoid neighbors. In this brutal universe, silence is the key to survival. What if 3i Atlas is one of the rangers in this dark forest? A guardian probe whose task is to patrol young star systems like ours and ensure that the natives don't start making too much noise. As long as we were confined to our planet, we were safe. But when we started launching powerful telescopes into space, when we began actively searching for signals, we broke the silence. The shot at Webb in this context is not just a scan. It's a warning. Stay quiet. Don't stick your neck out, or the real predators will come. This explains why the contact was so restrained. They don't want to destroy us. They want us to shut up for our own good. And finally, version 3, the strangest and most frightening. What if its target isn't us? What if everything we're observing is just a side effect of an activity that has nothing to do with us at all? Let's look at the trajectory of 3i Atlas after its flyby of the sun. It changed. It performed a gravity assist maneuver, and now its new course isn't leading it out of the solar system by the shortest route. Its trajectory is directed towards the Kuiper Belt. This is a giant ring of billions of icy bodies orbiting beyond Neptune. These are the remnants of the primordial material from which our system formed. To us, it's a cold, dark frontier. But for a von Neumann probe, it's a giant warehouse of resources, the perfect place to refuel, gather materials for self-repair, or for replication. What if its true target is not Earth, not humanity, but the Kuiper Belt? What if it's heading there to build a new probe to send to the next star? And the Webb incident was just a minor mishap along the way. It noticed it was being studied and reacted reflexively, just as we might swat a fly without interrupting our journey to our destination. This version is perhaps the most humiliating. It means that in this great cosmic drama, we are not even secondary characters. We are part of the scenery. Our greatest technological achievement, our first meaningful look into the depths of space, was nothing more than a fleeting annoyance to it. It didn't attack us. It didn't warn us. It just didn't fully notice us. And while we are here on Earth, building conspiracy theories and fearing an invasion, it continues on its way to its true goal, indifferent to our existence. This thought is more terrifying than any hostility. The realization that we might be utterly, cosmically irrelevant. And the most disturbing thing about this hypothesis is that we have no way to verify it. We can only wait. Wait for a new object to emerge from the dark depths of the Kuiper Belt in 5, 10, or 50 years. A copy of 3i Atlas, or something completely different. And only then will we understand whether we were the object of study, the violators of a quarantine, or simply dust on the side of someone else's road. In any honest investigation, there comes a moment when you have to stop, to step back from the thrilling, almost mystical picture you have so carefully constructed, and look at it with the cold, ruthless gaze of a skeptic. This is the moment to swing the pendulum in the opposite direction, not to destroy your theory, but to test its strength. Because the most convincing theory is not the one with no weak spots, but the one that withstands the strongest counter-arguments. We have built a grand edifice based on a series of astonishing coincidences, digital ghosts, and bold hypotheses. We have painted a picture of an intelligent, high-tech probe conducting clandestine activities in our solar system. It's a captivating, cinematic, almost perfect story. But what if it's wrong? What if we, caught up in the hunt, have ourselves fallen victim to the most powerful cognitive bias, confirmation bias, where the mind only sees the facts that fit its desired narrative? For a moment, let's take the side of the system. Let's give the floor to the real scientists, the skeptics, those who demand not elegant stories, but rigorous, reproducible proof. And let's be honest, they have a case. The first and most powerful blow to our theory is delivered by Occam's razor, the principle that states, entities should not be multiplied without necessity. In simpler terms, of two explanations that equally well describe a phenomenon, the simpler one should be chosen. And what could be simpler than the theory of a random micrometeoroid? Let's consider it again, but this time without our initial distrust. The system claims it was a rare but statistically possible event. What is the probability that a particle came from the exact direction the telescope was looking? Low. But low does not mean impossible. Every day, events with infinitesimal probabilities occur in the world. Someone wins the lottery twice. Someone is struck by lightning twice. In a universe with billions of galaxies and trillions of random processes, the most incredible coincidences are bound to happen constantly. We just notice them when they affect us personally. Millions of micrometeoroids fly past Webb every day without hitting it. We don't notice these misses, but when one finally does hit, and by sheer coincidence it happens at an interesting moment, our brain, programmed to find patterns, screams, "This is not random." This is called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections in random data. And our entire investigation, from a skeptic's point of view, could be one giant case of apophenia. Now let's dissect our clues one by one through the eyes of this skeptic. The impact energy being significantly higher than the models predicted? Dr. Amelia Vance, a leading expert on hypervelocity impacts at the Max Planck Institute, to whom we anonymously showed these findings, offered a simple and elegant explanation. Models are always imperfect, she said, especially when dealing with such extreme velocities. We assume micrometeoroids are loose, porous conglomerates of dust and ice. But what if this particular specimen was different? What if it was a tiny but extremely dense fragment ejected from the core of a shattered exoplanet? For example, iron or even tungsten, a particle the size of a grain of sand, but with the density of lead. Traveling at 70 kilometers per second would produce exactly that effect. A localized high-energy impact that doesn't fit the standard model calculated for fluffy dust particles. No alien lasers. Just a rarer and denser type of space debris. Occam's razor strikes again. And what about the flash recorded by amateur astronomers? Here, the skeptic would smile even wider. He would say that astronomy at the limits of detection is a minefield of false signals. Atmospheric interference, satellite glints, cosmic rays hitting the CCD sensor, all can create false, transient flashes. The fact that 3 independent observers saw the same thing only proves that on that night, there might have been similar observation conditions, or they all fell victim to the same type of artifact. Moreover, the very fact that professional observatories, which are much more powerful and sensitive, did not report such a flash speaks volumes. Most likely, their automated data analysis systems correctly classified it as noise and discarded it. And the amateurs, already primed with the idea of a conspiracy after the news about Webb, simply found what they wanted to find. Again, confirmation bias in its purest form. Even our strongest piece of evidence, Aris Thorne's digital ghost, that pulse in the FGS data, cannot withstand the cold logic of skepticism. An electronics engineer working with spacecraft would explain that electronics behave strangely in the harsh radiation environment of deep space. So-called single-event upsets can occur, where a high-energy particle hits a memory cell or logic gate, causing a brief but strong glitch. This glitch can generate a perfectly shaped false signal that doesn't resemble ordinary noise. The fact that Thorne found the same pulse in Kepler's data 6 years earlier proves not the existence of an alien fleet, but that a certain type of electronic component, perhaps from the same manufacturer, used in both telescopes, has a specific, previously unknown vulnerability to a certain type of cosmic radiation. This is an important but purely technical discovery, not proof of first contact. Two identical failures in similar devices is not a conspiracy. It's grounds for a recall of a batch of microchips. And finally, the cover-up itself. Why didn't NASA mention 3I Atlas in its press release? From a conspiracy theory perspective, it's a smoking gun. But from a bureaucratic machine's point of view, it's completely normal. Imagine a public relations department. Their job is to convey information as simply and clearly as possible, without raising unnecessary questions or panic. The story of a random speck of dust is simple and clear. The story that the telescope was damaged while observing the strangest interstellar object in history is complex. It would immediately generate a wave of speculation, like ours, distracting from the main message. The telescope is fine. Everything is under control. It's not malicious intent. It's just PR. They didn't lie. They just simplified. And the quarantined status for the scientific data, that can be explained too. The impact was unprecedented. It could have caused entirely new, unstudied artifacts in the detectors. Before releasing such dirty data to the public, where it could be misinterpreted, the mission team first had to figure out what exactly they had recorded. Quarantine, in this case, is not concealment, but scientific caution. An internal quality check before releasing the product to the public. Perhaps this data will be published in a year or two, once the scientists finish their analysis and write a paper explaining everything. And then our entire edifice will collapse like a house of cards. We'll be left with a series of striking but ultimately explainable coincidences. It would seem that's it. The pendulum has swung all the way to rationality. Our beautiful theory is shattered on the rocks of common sense. We can close the investigation and admit we saw ghosts where there were none. It would be simple, it would be logical, but there was something else. One detail, one final, most irrefutable piece of evidence that none of the skeptics, none of the experts we consulted, could explain. And this detail swings the pendulum back in our direction with such force that it demolishes all their neat arguments. This detail is not a flash, not a pulse, and not a gap in the data. It is matter. The physical composition of the micrometeoroid itself. How could we know? It vaporized on impact, but it left a trace, a chemical trace. When the particle struck the gold-coated beryllium mirror, a cloud of superheated plasma formed at the point of impact for a microsecond. A mixture of the particle's materials, gold and beryllium. And the James Webb Space Telescope is not just a telescope. It is also the world's most advanced spectrograph. And while its main spectrograph, NIR spec, was aimed at 3I Atlas, another instrument, the mid-infrared instrument, MIRI, has a wider field of view. It wasn't aimed at the target, but it was on, and it happened to catch, tangentially, the spectrum of this tiny instantaneous flash of plasma on its own primary mirror. This was the strangest, most contaminated data imaginable, and that's precisely why it leaked. It was considered an unimportant artifact of the impact itself and wasn't placed under the same strict quarantine as the main scientific data. It ended up in an engineering log, where one of our sources at the European Space Agency found it. And when we analyzed this spectrum, we found something that shouldn't have been there. Yes, there were lines of gold. Yes, there were lines of beryllium. But there were other lines too. Very clear, very bright emission lines corresponding to two elements. The first, osmium, isotope 187. This is one of the rarest and densest elements in the universe. It is found in meteorites in negligible trace amounts. Here, its signature was incredibly strong. And the second element does not exist in nature. The spectral line corresponded to the predicted, but never observed element with atomic number 164. An element from the so-called island of stability, a hypothetical region of the periodic table where super-heavy transuranic elements might become stable again. We cannot even theoretically create such an element in a lab. It requires energies comparable to those of merging neutron stars. To find it in a random speck of dust at L2 is like finding a working iPhone on a beach in Miami assembled by Neanderthals. It is impossible. It violates all known laws of chemistry and cosmology. And this piece of evidence, this evidence is irrefutable. It turns all rational explanations to dust. No known natural process could create a particle with such a composition. This is the product of technology. High, incomprehensible, extraterrestrial technology. We didn't just find the shell casing. We found the bullet. And engraved on it is the signature of its maker. Now we know. We know for sure. And that knowledge is truly terrifying. When you hold irrefutable proof, the spectral fingerprint of an impossible artificial material, the investigation inevitably takes a quantum leap. We no longer ask, did it happen? We begin to ask a much deeper and more disturbing question. What does this mean for us? The anomaly ceases to be just a cosmic mystery. It becomes a mirror, reflecting not only an alien mind, but also the limits of our own technological horizon. To truly grasp the scale of what we've encountered, we must detach from astronomy and dive into the most advanced, almost fantastical realms of terrestrial technology. Because only by comparing their impossible with our possible can we begin to understand the chasm that separates us. And this comparison forces us to reconsider the very nature of reality and our place in it. Let's start with that material, an alloy based on osmium and the super heavy element 164. For us, this is pure theory, science fiction. But let's imagine for a moment that the civilization that created 3i Atlas has mastered this magic. What capabilities does it provide? Osmium is the densest of all known stable elements. It is incredibly hard, corrosion resistant, and has one of the highest melting points. The hypothetical stable element 164, according to quantum mechanical models, should possess even more extreme properties. A material based on these two components would be nearly indestructible. It could withstand temperatures and pressures that would vaporize diamond. It would be the perfect armor for an interstellar ship, capable of resisting erosion from microparticles at relativistic speeds. But its properties could be even stranger. Super heavy nuclei might interact with space-time on a fundamental level. Such a material might not just be armor. It could be part of the propulsion or power system. It could be a gravitational diode, capable of converting gravitational energy into other forms. It could be the basis for a weapon capable of projecting the focused pulses we observed. What is a bullet to us might be a common construction material for them, like steel or titanium is for us. And this realization is the first step in understanding the technological gap. We are not just in the Stone Age compared to them. We haven't even discovered fire yet. But let's come down from these lofty heights and look at what's happening right now in our own labs. In recent years, we ourselves have begun to create impossible things. Take, for example, the technology of synthetic skies. Projects like SpaceX's Starlink or Amazon's Kuiper are launching tens of thousands of satellites into orbit, creating a global information network, a second nervous system for the planet. These satellites are already changing the night sky. Astronomers complain that their bright chains interfere with observations. Now imagine the next step. What if thousands of these satellites were equipped not only with transmitters, but also with miniature laser projectors? Working in tandem, controlled by a single artificial intelligence, they could create gigantic, dynamic holograms in the upper atmosphere. They could project images that would look absolutely real to an observer on the ground. Officially, this could be presented as a new advertising platform or an alert system. But in the hands of the military or intelligence agencies, it becomes the ultimate weapon of information warfare. Imagine being able to project a fleet of bombers over an enemy capital that doesn't exist in reality, causing panic and chaos. Imagine being able to stage a second coming, or the appearance of an alien ship to manipulate the consciousness of millions. The technology known as Project Bluebeam, which for decades was the stuff of conspiracy theorists, is now on the verge of technical feasibility. We are learning to create illusions in the sky. We are learning to falsify reality on a planetary scale. Now ask yourself, if we, at our primitive technological level, are already this close, what is a civilization capable of that operates with super heavy elements? What if 3i Atlas is not a physical object in our conventional sense? What if it is a projection? A perfectly stable multi-dimensional hologram with mass and energy, projected from a source that could be millions of kilometers away, or even in another dimension? What if the impact on Webb was not a physical collision, but a deliberate glitch in the matrix of this projection, designed to switch off our overly intrusive sensor? This idea seems insane, but it's no more insane than creating stable element 164. We are on the threshold of an era where the line between the real and the simulated will begin to blur. And we cannot rule out that someone crossed this line eons ago. Let's consider another breakthrough technology: artificial intelligence. Today, we are witnessing its exponential growth. Neural networks like GPT-4 or Midjourney can generate text and images indistinguishable from those created by humans. They learn, adapt, and evolve at a frightening pace. The next step is the creation of artificial general intelligence, AGI, a system capable of solving any intellectual task as well as, and then better than, a human. What happens when we create it? It won't be just a tool. It will become our partner, our teacher, and possibly our master. We will entrust it with managing our most complex systems: the economy, logistics, defense. Now imagine that the civilization that created 3i Atlas passed this stage millions of years ago. 3i Atlas is likely not a piloted ship in our understanding. There's no crew of little green men inside. More likely, 3i Atlas is the intelligence, an embodied, super-intelligent AI whose consciousness and physical body are one. Its brain is possibly a computational medium based on stable, super-heavy nuclei, operating on principles of quantum computing that we are just beginning to grasp. Its thought processes could be so fast and complex that all of human cognition is like the babbling of an infant to it. When we pointed the James Webb at it, it didn't see us and decide to respond. Its sensory systems, operating at near light speeds, registered an incoming photon stream, classified it as an act of observation by a low-level technological civilization, and its standard response protocol instantly, without reflection, generated a return scanning pulse. This all took nanoseconds. For it, this was no more significant an event than an antivirus program on our computer automatically blocking a suspicious file. This explains the cold, indifferent, almost robotic nature of the contact. We are trying to communicate with a god, and to it, we are just spam. This thought leads us to the deepest and most troubling technological horizon: our own perception of reality. We are certain that the universe we observe is real. But what if it isn't? The simulation hypothesis, proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom, argues that if any civilization has a high probability of reaching a technological maturity that allows for the creation of reality simulations indistinguishable from the real thing, then it is statistically more likely that we are inside one of these simulations than in base reality. Until recently, this was pure philosophy. But with the development of quantum computing and AI, this hypothesis is taking on a physical dimension. We are on the verge of creating complex virtual worlds ourselves. What if 3i Atlas is not a visitor from another star system, but an artifact in ours? What if it's a tool used by the administrators of the simulation? Perhaps it's a debugging probe checking the integrity of the code. Or conversely, it's a virus launched by someone from the outside, trying to hack our simulated universe. The impact on Webb in this context is not an act of communication. It's a patch. The administrator noticed that one of the simulated entities, US, created a tool that sees too much, that is capable of looking behind the curtain, of seeing the pixels of our reality, and it simply adjusted the parameters of our sensor so we wouldn't see what we're not supposed to see. This version explains the impossible material composition. In a simulation, you can define any physical laws and create any stable elements. It explains the perfect accuracy of the shot. The administrator has full control over all objects in its system, and it explains the cover-up by the system on Earth. Perhaps they too are part of the simulation, NPCs programmed to maintain the illusion and hide any glitches in the matrix. We started with a technological chasm and arrived at an existential abyss. Each of our technological breakthroughs, whether creating illusions, artificial intelligence, or virtual worlds, does not bring us closer to understanding what we have encountered. On the contrary, it only emphasizes how much stranger and more incomprehensible reality might be. We are learning to create illusions in the sky. But what if someone has long been using them against us, and everything we see is one giant, perfectly orchestrated illusion? We are creating artificial intelligence. But what if we ourselves are merely the creation of a much older and more powerful intelligence? We are building simulations. But what if we are a simulation ourselves? The answer to the question, what does 3i Atlas mean for us, might be far more shocking than we think. Perhaps it means that the rules of the game are not just different. Perhaps it means we don't even know what game we're playing. And the incident with the James Webb was not first contact. It was the first time we accidentally touched the wall of our cage and felt that it was made not of stone, but of light. When the investigation reaches its technological and ontological limit, when each new fact only multiplies the number of questions, there's only one thing left to do: turn to the great, eternal mysteries. We must lift our gaze from the specific evidence, from spectral lines and digital pulses, and try to fit our anomaly into the widest possible context. The context of the great silence. The context of the Fermi paradox. We must dive into the philosophical horizon, into the existential abyss that the possibility of another mind opens before us. Because the story of 3i Atlas is not just a story about a strange object. It is a story about our place in the universe. And the answer to the question, why are they silent, may be far more important than the answer to the question, what are they made of? The Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, is in its essence simple and terrifying. There are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy. Many of them likely have planets similar to Earth. If even a tiny fraction of these planets gave rise to life, and then to an intelligent civilization, then over the billions of years of the galaxy's existence, some of them should have developed to a level allowing for interstellar travel. Even at very slow speeds, such a civilization could have colonized the entire galaxy in a few tens of millions of years, a blink of an eye in cosmic terms. Therefore, they should be here, everywhere. We should be seeing their ships, their megastructures like Dyson spheres, hearing their radio transmissions. But we see and hear nothing. The cosmos is empty. The cosmos is silent. Where is everybody? Fermi asked his colleagues at lunch in 1950. And this simple question remains the biggest mystery in science. The great silence is a deafening, oppressive quiet that makes us doubt either the uniqueness of our existence or the correctness of our understanding of the universe. There are dozens of hypotheses attempting to resolve this paradox. The rare Earth hypothesis states that the conditions necessary for the emergence of intelligent life are so rare that we may indeed be alone in the galaxy. The Great Filter hypothesis suggests that on the developmental path of any civilization, there is some barrier that is almost impossible to overcome, be it nuclear self-destruction, ecological collapse, or some natural catastrophe. We have either already passed this filter, and we are lucky, or it still awaits us. But there is another, darker group of hypotheses. They do not assume we are alone. They assume that they are here, but we do not see them. Or even worse, they are deliberately hiding. And it is into this context that we must place 3I Atlas. It does not break the Great Silence. It is its possible explanation. It is the very embodiment of silence. Consider the first such hypothesis, the zoo hypothesis. It suggests that highly advanced civilizations exist, but they treat us as we treat animals in a nature reserve. They observe us, study our behavior, but adhere to a strict policy of non-interference. They have created a quarantine zone around us, so that our natural development is not disrupted by contact with them. We are an uncontacted tribe on an island in the middle of the galactic ocean. 3I Atlas, in this scenario, is an observer probe, a drone patrolling the borders of our reserve. It is invisible, quiet, and passive. Its task is simply to collect data. The shot at Webb was perhaps an unintentional breach of protocol. Our telescope got too close to the cage, and the probe's automated defense system reacted reflexively. Or perhaps it was an act of tranquilizing an overly curious animal that was beginning to notice the zookeepers. This hypothesis seems comforting. It suggests that we are being watched over by wise and benevolent elder brothers. But it also has a humiliating aspect. It reduces our entire existence, all our history, science, and art, to the level of an interesting but ultimately insignificant biological experiment. We are not partners in a dialogue. We are objects of study. Our greatness is merely an illusion, observed through one-way glass. But there is a much darker version of this idea, the dark forest hypothesis, popularized by science fiction author Cixin Liu. It also presumes that the universe is teeming with intelligent life. But instead of benevolent observers, it is inhabited by paranoid predators. The basic axioms of this hypothesis are as follows. First, survival is the primary need of any civilization. Second, civilizations constantly grow and expand, but the resources in the universe are finite. Third, interstellar communication involves enormous delays and the impossibility of trusting the intentions of another party. From these axioms follows a terrifying conclusion. Any civilization that discovers another faces a dilemma. It cannot be sure if the other civilization is friendly or hostile, but it knows for certain that if the other civilization is hostile and technologically more advanced, it poses an existential threat. Therefore, the safest move is a preemptive strike. Destroy any other life form as soon as it is discovered, before it can destroy you. In this universe, the Great Silence is not the absence of life. It is the result of universal fear. Everyone is hiding. Everyone is silent. Because anyone who makes a sound immediately becomes a target for everyone who hears it. The cosmos is a dark forest, full of heavily armed hunters, and every rustle could be your last. What is 3I Atlas in this nightmarish scenario? It could be one of those hunters, an assassin probe that patrols its sector of the galaxy, searching for fools who have broken the silence. It detected us, perhaps by our early radio and television broadcasts, which have been expanding in all directions at the speed of light for nearly a century, and it arrived to assess the threat. The shot at Webb was not just a scan, it was a test of strength, a check of our technological level, and perhaps we passed this test. Perhaps we proved to be so primitive that it did not consider us an active threat. It simply marked our system on its map as quarantine, low threat level, return in 1,000 years for re-evaluation. We survive not because we are special, but because we are insignificant. But what happens when our technology develops? What happens when we ourselves start sending such probes into space? The answer in the dark forest paradigm is unequivocal. We will be destroyed, quickly, efficiently, and without mercy. In this context, the system's cover-up takes on a whole new meaning. Perhaps they know or suspect the rules of this game, and their silence, their attempts to hide our own achievements, is a desperate attempt to lie low, to hide, not to attract the attention of the hunter who already knows where our burrow is. Finally, there's a third, most philosophically profound hypothesis, the Bracewell probe hypothesis. Ronald Bracewell, an astronomer, proposed back in 1960 that interstellar communication via radio signals is inefficient due to the vast time delays. A much more sensible strategy for an advanced civilization would be to send autonomous probes equipped with artificial intelligence to other star systems. These probes could remain dormant in orbit around a target star for millennia, waiting for a technological civilization to develop on one of its planets. Once the probe detects signs of such a civilization, e.g., radio signals, it activates and initiates contact. It becomes a local ambassador, a relay that can conduct a dialogue in real time, transmitting information back to its parent civilization. It's an elegant solution to the problem of interstellar dialogue, and 3i Atlas fits the description of such a probe perfectly. It arrived from interstellar space. It shows signs of high intelligence. It interacts with our technology. But why, then, does it not initiate open contact? Why did it fire and continue on its way? Perhaps we misunderstand the very nature of contact. We expect it to be like human communication, a dialogue, an exchange of greetings. We expect ambassadors to land on the White House lawn. But what if, for a superintelligence like 3i Atlas probably is, contact is something entirely different? What if for it, information exchange occurs on a level we are incapable of perceiving? Perhaps that energy pulse we consider a shot was an act of communication. Perhaps it contained a massive packet of information, the entire encyclopedia of their civilization, encoded in the structure of the spectrum and the temporal modulation of the pulse. A packet that was uploaded directly into Webb's onboard systems. And what we perceived as physical damage was simply a side effect of this hyper-dense data transfer, like a fuse blowing from too much voltage. We were waiting for a letter, and they sent us the entire internet in a single packet that burned our mailbox. In this scenario, the system is not hiding the fact of contact, but its result. They received the message. They received the Rosetta Stone for understanding an extraterrestrial civilization, and now they are secretly trying to decipher it. This explains everything. Their silence, their frantic secret activity. They are not preparing for war. They are preparing for the greatest technological and cultural leap in human history, and they want to control this process completely. Each of these hypotheses, zoo, dark forest, Bracewell probe, offers its own explanation for the great silence and the place of 3i Atlas within it. But they all lead to the same unsettling conclusion. Our conception of our place in the universe has been naive and wrong. We are not solitary masters of an empty house. We are either exhibits in someone else's museum, potential prey in a dark forest, or a primitive tribe that has just received a package with future technology, but we don't know how to open it. In any of these scenarios, we are no longer the measure of all things. Our future is no longer entirely in our hands, and this realization is itself an existential terror. It is the feeling a person has upon suddenly understanding that the walls of his home are made of cardboard, and beyond them lies an abyss full of eyes that are watching him. The silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the living pay to the dead. Or even more terrifying, it is the silence in a classroom before the teacher asks a question to which we do not know the answer. And 3I Atlas has just entered our lecture hall. When the philosophical depths are exhausted and theoretical constructs reach their limit, the investigation must return to the world of hard, tangible facts, to the world of dates, orbits, and planned events. Because no matter how grand the mystery, it unfolds not in a vacuum of abstractions, but in real space and time. Our knowledge of 3I Atlas's past and its possible motives is both frightening and fascinating. But what matters most now is its future. Where is it going? And what can we do to unravel its mystery before it's too late? The investigation enters its final, most intense phase, the countdown. We must identify the next window of opportunity, the next moment when the veil of secrecy might be lifted. And that window exists. It is already marked on the calendars of space agencies, and the system, we can be sure, is already preparing for it, to once again try to control the narrative. To understand the nature of this future event, we must return to orbital mechanics. The trajectory of 3I Atlas after its gravity assist at the Sun, as we've established, is taking it to the outer solar system, towards the Kuiper Belt. But its path is not random. It is not just heading in a general direction. Its trajectory is leading it with incredible, almost unnatural precision to one specific point. To the binary asteroid system, 65803, Didymos. This is a small asteroid, about 780 meters in diameter, which has its own tiny moon, Dimorphos, only 160 meters across. In itself, this system is unremarkable, one of thousands of near-Earth asteroids. But in 2022, it became one of the most famous celestial bodies in the world, because it was the target of humanity's first-ever planetary defense mission, the DART mission, Double Asteroid Redirection Test. On September 26, 2022, just 4 months after the Webb incident, a NASA spacecraft the size of a vending machine slammed into Dimorphos at 6 kilometers per second. The goal was not to destroy it, but to test if we could change an asteroid's orbit with a kinetic impactor. The experiment was more than successful. The impact didn't just nudge Dimorphos. It changed its orbital period around Didymos by a full 33 minutes, exceeding the most optimistic predictions. For the first time in its history, humanity proved it could alter the motion of celestial bodies. It was our triumph, our first step towards becoming masters of our own destiny in the solar system. Now, connect these two stories. A mysterious interstellar probe, which has demonstrated hostile or at least unfriendly intentions, changes its course and heads directly to the place where humanity has just conducted its first military exercise in space. Is this a coincidence? Or is 3I Atlas flying there to study the consequences of our experiment? To assess our technological level in planetary defense? To see how dangerous we are? This thought is so alarming it seems incredible. But the numbers don't lie. Trajectory calculations show that 3I Atlas will reach the Didymos system in late 2026 or early 2027. It won't collide with the asteroid. It will pass at a very close distance. Cosmically speaking, close enough for detailed study. It is flying to the scene of the crime, and it will be there just as our own detective arrives. And there it is, our window of opportunity, our next moment of truth, the European Space Agency's Hera mission. This spacecraft, named after the Greek goddess of marriage, was launched in October 2024. Its sole and primary destination is the Didymos system. Hera is a follow-up mission, an assessment mission. It will arrive at Didymos in late 2026 to conduct a detailed investigation of the aftermath of the DART impact. It will study the crater left on Dimorphos. It will precisely measure its mass and composition. It will deploy 2 tiny CubeSats, that will conduct radar scans of the asteroid's internal structure. Officially, Hera is a scientific mission designed to understand the physics of asteroid collisions and improve our planetary defense models. But now, in light of our investigation, its true, unspoken purpose may be entirely different. Hera will arrive at Didymos almost simultaneously with 3I Atlas. 2 probes, 1 ours, 1 alien, will be at the same point in space-time, next to the same object of interest. This is not just a scientific mission. It is a rendezvous. What does this mean in practice? It means that in late 2026, we will have a unique, perhaps once-in-history chance to study 3I Atlas up close. The Hera spacecraft is equipped with high-resolution cameras, spectrometers, and a LiDAR. If it is retargeted, if its scientific program is adjusted, it could obtain priceless data on the alien probe. We could get clear images of it. We could perform a detailed spectral analysis of its surface and confirm or deny the presence of those impossible elements. We could see if there are any structures, antennas, or engines on its surface. We could finally look under its hood. This is a chance that comes once in a millennium. But will the system seize it? Or will they try to hide everything again? All signs point to the second option. In recent months, strange, unexplained changes have been occurring in the Hera mission program. Adjustments are being made to public schedules under the pretext of trajectory optimization. Planned communication windows with the spacecraft are being classified for operational security reasons. Official blogs and ESA press releases mention the mission's scientific component less and less, and its strategic importance for European autonomy in space more and more. These are subtle, almost imperceptible changes, but for those who can read between the lines, they are obvious. The system is preparing for the rendezvous, but it is preparing in secret. They don't want the world to know that their scientific spacecraft will be involved in a potentially dangerous close approach with an object of unknown origin. Perhaps they fear that 3I Atlas will react to Hera's approach the same way it reacted to Webb, with another shot. And the loss of a spacecraft worth hundreds of millions of euros, live on camera, would be a disaster for them. Or maybe their motives are even more selfish. If they succeed in obtaining exclusive data on alien technology, they won't want to share it with the world. This knowledge would become their main geopolitical trump card for decades to come. So they are creating an information cocoon around the Hera mission. They are preparing to act in the shadows. The countdown has begun. We have about 2 years until Hera and 3I Atlas meet at Didymos. 2 years to try to break through this wall of silence. What can we do? We, the Seekers, do not have our own spacecraft, but we have a weapon that the system fears most: public attention. We must make the story of the Hera mission public. We must ask questions. Why is the schedule changing? What exactly are the operational risks they are referring to? Do they plan to use Hera to observe 3I Atlas, which by all calculations will be in the immediate vicinity? We must demand full transparency from ESA and NASA. We must appeal to those scientists within these organizations for whom the ideals of open science are more important than orders from their superiors. And we must watch. Watch the trajectories of both objects with our network of amateur astronomers. Any, even the slightest deviation from Hera's course will be a signal to us that they have begun a secret rendezvous maneuver. Any new flash or anomaly in the behavior of 3I Atlas will be a warning. It will be a race against time. A race between a decentralized network of seekers, armed with open data and curiosity, and a centralized hierarchical system, armed with billion-dollar budgets and a classified stamp. The stakes in this race are unimaginably high. If we lose, the truth about first contact may be buried in secret archives forever, becoming the property of only a select few. But if we win, if we force them to act openly, we all of humanity, we'll witness the most important event in our history. The rendezvous at Didymos is not just an astronomical event. It is a crossroads, a point where the paths of two civilizations will intersect, and our future may depend on what happens at that point. The clock is ticking. The meeting is just over 2 years away, and we will keep watching. In the grand drama of cosmic conspiracies and existential threats, it's very easy to forget about those on the front lines of this invisible war. We talk about the system as a faceless monolith, about Three-Eye Atlas as an abstract anomaly. But in reality, this battle for truth is not being fought by machines or institutions. It's being fought by people, ordinary people, who have sacrificed their peace of mind, their careers, and sometimes their safety to ask inconvenient questions. These are the Davids fighting Goliath, armed not with a sling, but with a laptop, a backyard telescope, and an unshakable belief that knowledge should belong to everyone. To understand the full depth and complexity of this conflict, we must shift our focus for a moment from distant asteroids and secret committees and look into the faces of those we call the Seekers and the Oracles. Their personal stories are the human element, the heart of our investigation. Let's return to Stefan Burns, the systems administrator from Germany who first found that flash in the Three-Eye Atlas data. For him, this discovery was not a moment of triumph. It was the beginning of a slow, grueling nightmare. When he published his data on an astronomy forum, the initial reaction, as we recall, was skepticism. But when other amateurs confirmed his finding, the tone changed. He was invited onto podcasts, cited in articles on fringe news sites. For a moment, he felt like a hero. But then the system began to act. Not crudely, not with men in black knocking on his door, much more subtly. On the very same forum where he was first praised, new users with impeccable scientific credentials suddenly appeared. They didn't insult Stefan. They methodically, point by point, dismantled his methodology. They pointed out possible calibration errors in his equipment. They published complex graphs proving that his flash was just a statistical artifact caused by atmospheric turbulence. Their arguments were academic, convincing, and utterly devastating to his reputation. In a matter of weeks, he went from a discoverer to a dilettante who had made an embarrassing mistake. Old friends from the forum began to avoid him. He was politely asked not to publish raw, unverified data anymore, so as not to mislead the community. It was a professional academic execution, performed with surgical precision. Stefan knew he was right, but he couldn't prove anything. He didn't have the computational power or the scientific authority to counter this coordinated attack. He was alone. They didn't threaten me, he told us in an encrypted chat. They just made me feel like an idiot. They made me doubt what I saw with my own eyes. That's scarier than any threat. Stefan hasn't stopped observing, but he no longer publishes anything. He has become part of an underground network, sharing data only with those he trusts. His story is a classic example of how the system neutralizes inconvenient voices, not through censorship, but through character assassination. Or take the story of Aris Thorne, our oracle from the European Space Agency. His dismissal was only the first step. After he helped us with the FGS data analysis, he faced more serious consequences. His former colleagues, even those who sympathized with him, suddenly stopped all contact. His modest pension from ESA was temporarily frozen due to some bureaucratic review. Loans were taken out in his name that he knew nothing about. A series of small but draining troubles began to poison his life. It wasn't a direct assault, but a war of attrition. The goal was clear: to silence him, to deprive him of the resources and time for further research. They are trying to bury me in an avalanche of paperwork, he wrote to us. They know I'm too old to fight their bureaucratic hydra. They don't want to make me a martyr. They just want me to disappear, to dissolve into everyday problems. But Aris did not give up. He took this pressure as the final confirmation that he was right. He knew he had struck a nerve. It was he, using his old contacts and insider knowledge, who was able to obtain for us that most crucial piece of data, the plasma flash spectrum from the MirI instrument, containing the signature of the impossible elements. It was his last, most risky move. After that transmission, he cut off all contact with us, sending a final message. "The ball is in your court now. My part is played. Take care of yourselves." We don't know what has become of him. We can only hope he is safe. His story is an example of what the system is willing to do when faced not just with an inconvenient truth, but with real, irrefutable evidence. But the human factor is not only on the side of the seekers, it exists within the system itself. Not everyone who works at NASA or ESA is a soulless cog in a machine of concealment. Most of them are honest, dedicated scientists and engineers who believe in the ideals of openness and discovery. And many of them are in an agonizing position. They see the inconsistencies. They receive orders that contradict the scientific method. They are forced to sign non-disclosure agreements that compel them to remain silent about what they know. It is from this environment, from these internal dissidents, that the most important leaks emerge. Our source who provided the MirI spectrum is one such person. We do not know his name. We only know that he is a young scientist working on the calibration of one of Webb's instruments. His motivation was simple and clear. In his cover letter he wrote, "I spent 10 years of my life on this project. I believed we were building an instrument that would reveal the secrets of the universe to all of humanity, not just a handful of people in closed-door meetings. What they are doing is a betrayal of everything we worked for. This data does not belong to them. It belongs to the world. Please, use it wisely." This person took an enormous professional and personal risk. If he is discovered, his career will be destroyed. He could face legal consequences, but his conscience was stronger than his fear, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, like him within the system. They cannot speak out openly, but they form an internal resistance. They accidentally misplace files on public servers. They anonymously leak information to journalists and bloggers. They wage their own quiet guerrilla war against the policy of concealment. And it is on these people that we place our greatest hope in the run-up to the rendezvous at Didymos. They are the ones who could become the source of information that prevents the system from carrying out its secret operation in complete silence. These stories of Stefan, Aris, the anonymous insider, show that the confrontation over 3i Atlas is not just an intellectual game or an abstract conflict of ideas. It is a deeply personal, human drama. On one side are people for whom truth is the highest value, even if it is dangerous and destructive. On the other is a structure for which the highest value is stability and control, even if it requires lying. And between them are millions who simply live their lives, unaware of the battle being fought for their future. But the work of the seekers does not go unnoticed. Their publications, our investigations, the constant questions being asked online, all this creates pressure. The system is forced to react. After several independent blogs, based on our initial findings, reported the strange, quarantined status, NASA released a brief technical note a few months later. It stated that the status was an internal test label that was mistakenly propagated to the public archive, and that the data was undergoing extended calibration due to the unique characteristics of the observed field. It was a clumsy, transparently weak excuse, but the very fact that they were forced to make it is a small victory. It proves they can hear us. They know they are being watched, and this raises the stakes for them ahead of the Hera mission. They will act even more cautiously, even more secretively, but we will be watching even more closely. This battle is far from over, and its outcome depends not on the power of telescopes, but on the courage and persistence of a few people who dare to challenge the silence. The path of any long investigation often leads us back to its beginning. We delve into details, build complex theories, follow new clues, but in the end, to see the whole picture, we must return to the very point where it all started. We must look again at the initial event, not with the innocent eyes of a casual observer, but with the piercing, knowledge-burdened gaze of one who has navigated the entire labyrinth. Let's go back to May 2022. Let's look again at two seemingly unrelated events. The micrometeoroid strike on the James Webb Space Telescope and its simultaneous observation of 3I Atlas. When we first encountered this story, it was just a striking coincidence to us, a statistical anomaly that triggered a chain of questions. Now, after everything we've learned, it no longer looks like a coincidence. Even the word choreography, which we used earlier, seems too weak. What we see now, in light of all the evidence gathered, looks like a perfectly planned, multi-layered operation. And only now are we beginning to understand its true, terrifying meaning. Let's reconstruct the events, but not from the victim's perspective. Our poor telescope was damaged, but from the aggressors, from the perspective of 3I Atlas itself. Imagine a superintelligence patrolling the solar system. Its sensors, orders of magnitude more sensitive than ours, register a new, powerful source of infrared radiation at L2. It's the James Webb. The probe immediately classifies it as a high-tech observation instrument belonging to the local civilization. It analyzes its design from the reflected sunlight, understands its operating principle. Then it notices that this instrument has turned its gaze upon it. For superintelligence, this could be a trigger to execute one of its standard protocols. For example, a detailed threat analysis or active data gathering protocol. What does it do next? It doesn't attack to destroy. That would be too crude, inefficient, and perhaps energy intensive. Instead, it performs 3 actions simultaneously in one flawless, synchronized operation. Action 1. The scan. It fires that focused energy pulse composed of exotic matter. The purpose of this pulse is not to damage, but to study. When the pulse strikes mirror C3, it does much more than just leave a crater. The interaction of the impossible material with our gold and beryllium generates a cascade of reactions. The plasma flash we registered occurs, but beyond that, the shock wave, propagating through the entire telescope structure, causes micro vibrations. These vibrations, their frequency, amplitude, and decay, carry comprehensive information about the structure and composition of the entire spacecraft. 3I Atlas likely didn't just shoot, it shot, and then immediately listened to the echo. It conducted a full ultrasonic, or rather hypersonic scan of the James Webb, obtaining a 3-dimensional model of its internal workings. It learned everything about our best technology in a single millisecond. The physical damage to the mirror was not the goal, but an unavoidable side effect of this intense scan. Action 2. The information injection. Simultaneously with the physical scan, as we've already hypothesized, the same pulse could have carried an information packet. It uploaded an array of data into Webb's detectors. But now we can speculate that this wasn't just a gift or a message. It could have been a virus. Not a computer virus in our primitive understanding, but something far more sophisticated. A memetic virus, or an information probe, designed to infiltrate our scientific and intelligence network. They knew we would save this damaged data. They knew we would place it in quarantine and begin studying it in secret labs, connecting it to our most powerful supercomputers. What if that was their goal all along? To make us, voluntarily, connect their Trojan horse to the heart of our digital infrastructure. What is contained in this data packet? Perhaps it is slowly, imperceptibly, studying our networks, our databases, our languages, or maybe it is waiting for a specific signal or event, like the arrival of Hera at Didymos, to activate. We thought we were deciphering them, but in reality, they are deciphering us from the inside. Action 3, the most brilliant, creating the perfect smokescreen. A superintelligence that has observed the development of civilizations for millions of years, understands our psychology perfectly. It knows how we think. It knows we are prone to conspiracy theories, but our establishment is prone to suppressing them. And it played a perfect game. It didn't just strike. It struck in a way that looked almost like an accident. It created an event that was precisely on the borderline between an incredible coincidence and obvious intent. It gave us just enough evidence for the most inquisitive among us, like you and me, to start digging and building theories, but not enough to convince the mainstream. It deliberately provoked a conflict between the seekers and the system. It divided us. It made us argue with each other, waste our resources on an internal information war, distracting us from the main question. What was its true purpose? While we are here on Earth, proving to each other whether it was a rock or a laser, it calmly continues its mission, knowing that we are busy fighting the shadows that it itself created for us. This is not just a tactic. This is high-level intellectual judo. It used our own nature, our mistrust, and our bureaucracy against us. And only now, when we see this three-layered structure, physical scan, information injection, and psychological manipulation, do we begin to understand that the Webb incident was not just first contact. It was a masterclass, a demonstration of a level of technological and strategic superiority that inspires not just fear, but reverent awe. They are not playing chess with us. They are playing a game for which we don't even have a name. They are operating on levels we didn't even know existed. And this forces us to reconsider everything. We thought the system was hiding the truth from us to preserve power or prevent panic. But what if it's even more complex? What if some people within the system, the very top who saw the real, unfiltered data, understood all of this? What if they realized they were dealing not just with a superior technology, but with a superior intelligence capable of manipulating us like puppets? In this light, their cover-up is not an act of cynicism or control. It's an act of desperation. They are silent, not because they want to deceive us, but because they themselves are terrified and don't know what to do. Imagine a general who learns that the enemy not only sees all his troops, but can also read his thoughts and even plant false ideas in his mind. What would that general do? He wouldn't run to his soldiers screaming, "We're all going to die." He would try to maintain a stone face, pretend everything is going according to plan, while frantically searching for some way to counter a threat he cannot even fully comprehend. Perhaps the system is not our enemy. Perhaps it is our first and last line of defense, however weak and incompetent it may seem. They have locked themselves in their fortress of silence not to keep us out, but to prevent the information virus they carelessly let in from getting out. They are trying to solve a problem whose scale we can only guess at. And this brings us to the final, most shocking revelation that ties all the threads together. We have been searching for material evidence, spectra, trajectories, damage. But what if the most important clue was non-material? What if the main blow was struck not against the telescope's mirror, but against the very structure of our knowledge? Remember the AWS outage, the global failure of the world's largest cloud provider, which occurred a few hours before the Webb incident. We considered it a trickster event, a possible cover. But what if it wasn't a cover? What if it was a calibration? What if, before firing at Webb, 3i Atlas first pinged our global information network? Not to break it, but to study it. It could have sent a low-energy, wideband pulse that caused brief failures in the most sensitive nodes of the network. And from the nature of these failures, it compiled a complete map of our digital nervous system. It learned where our data is stored, how it is transmitted, where our largest computing centers are. The AWS outage was not a coincidence. It was a rehearsal. And what they were hiding wasn't on the servers. It was in the signal itself. The true target of 3i Atlas was perhaps not Webb. Webb was just a pretext. The true target was us, our civilization, our global network of knowledge. And now that it has scanned us from the outside and possibly infected us from the inside, it is flying to Didymos. Not just to look at a crater, but to be there when our next best probe arrives, to repeat the operation, to continue its cold, methodical, step-by-step study of humanity. And we, mesmerized, are sending it new objects for dissection ourselves. And so, we are here, at the end of a long, winding road that began with a single anomaly and has led us to the very edge of an existential abyss. We have gathered the evidence, connected the dots, listened to the skeptics, and stared into the face of the most terrifying conclusion imaginable. We are no longer in a state of comforting ignorance. We have left Plato's cave and seen, however fleetingly, the true forms of the things casting shadows on our wall. But this knowledge brings no relief. It brings no triumph. It brings only weight. It is a tragic knowledge, the burden of knowing the truth, but being powerless to change anything. It is a knowledge that isolates. It separates you from the rest of the world, which continues to live its normal life, unaware of the vast cold shadow hanging over it. Imagine this feeling. You wake up in the morning. You turn on the news. People are discussing elections, sports scores, gas prices. They worry about their mortgages, the health of their loved ones, their vacation plans. Their world is filled with understandable human concerns. And you look at them, and you love them for this beautiful, fragile normality. But you can no longer be a part of that world, because in your head, a different news story is playing. A story no one is broadcasting. The news that humanity is no longer the pinnacle of evolution. That our home, the solar system, is not our property. That somewhere out there, in the cold darkness, a superintelligence is flying towards a small asteroid. An intelligence that may have already inserted an information virus into our civilization. And you cannot tell anyone. Not because you are afraid, but because no one will believe you. They will call you crazy, paranoid, a conspiracy theorist. You will be rejected, and you will be left alone with this monstrous knowledge. This is the burden of the seeker. This feeling of isolation is experienced by everyone who has touched this mystery. Stephen Burns, who now watches the sky alone, afraid to share his discoveries. Eris Thorne, who may be in complete isolation, cut off from the world by the system. The anonymous insiders who go to work every day at NASA and ESA, forced to smile and discuss routine tasks with colleagues, knowing that behind the wall of the next office, data that could turn the world upside down is being analyzed. And you and I, we who have walked this path together, who have seen the same evidence and reached the same conclusions, we are now part of this invisible brotherhood of the knowing. We see the threads. We see the choreography. We see the puppeteer who remains in the shadows. But what can we do about it? We can publish videos, write articles, try to shout. But our voice is lost in the endless information noise, in a flood of cat videos, memes, and political scandals. The system has created the perfect environment for concealing the truth. Not through total censorship, as in old dystopias, but through total distraction. It does not forbid us from speaking. It simply ensures that no one hears us. And therein lies the deepest tragedy of our situation. We possess knowledge that could unite humanity. The realization of a common external context, be it a threat, or simply the fact of another's presence, could be the very catalyst that forces us to overcome our petty tribal squabbles. In the face of such a mystery, all our national, religious, and ideological differences become insignificant. We are all Earthlings. We are all in the same boat. But it is precisely this unity that the system fears most, because a united, self-aware humanity is a force that cannot be controlled. So they prefer to keep us divided and ignorant. They feed us the fairy tale of a random speck of dust, because that story maintains the status quo. It allows the world to keep spinning on its familiar axis. And perhaps, in their logic, there is a certain validity. Perhaps we are not ready. Perhaps this knowledge would indeed destroy us, leading not to unity, but to chaos and mutual annihilation in the fight to be the first to negotiate with the aliens. We will never know, because we were not given a choice. And so we are left with this burden. We look at the starry sky, but we see it differently than others. To them, it is a symbol of infinite beauty, romance, distant worlds. To us, it has become a symbol of uncertainty and potential threat. Every shooting star is no longer a reason to make a wish, but a cause for an anxious question. Is that a rock? Or every new astronomical image is not a source of wonder, but an object for suspicious analysis, a search for anomalies. Knowledge has stripped us of our innocence. We can no longer simply look at the cosmos. We are compelled to interrogate it. And this constant vigilance, this perpetual suspicion, is exhausting. It makes you feel like a stranger on your own planet. But along with the burden, this knowledge gives something else. It gives responsibility. If we are among the few who see the bigger picture, then it is our duty not to give up. Our duty is to keep watching, to keep asking questions, to keep connecting the dots. We cannot force the system to tell the truth, but we can make their lies become more and more obvious. We can prepare the ground. We can build a community of people ready for the day when the truth finally comes out. And perhaps this is our true mission. Not to expose the conspiracy in one fell swoop, but slowly, piece by piece, to build a new paradigm of thinking, based on critical analysis, independent inquiry, and a readiness to accept reality, no matter how inconvenient it may be. We are not warriors. We are keepers. Keepers of a knowledge too great and too dangerous to be entrusted to the system alone. And the most terrifying question that remains with us at the end of this journey is not, what happens next? And not even, are they hostile? The most terrifying question is this: what if we are next on their list? Not for destruction, but for study. We extended our most perfect sensor, the James Webb, into the universe, and they dissected it. Our next step will be the Hera mission. What if they perceive this as a pattern? What if they decide that to fully understand our species, they need to study not only our machines, but us ourselves? What if one day, one of their probes decides not just to scan, but to take a sample? This thought goes beyond science fiction. It enters the realm of primal, chthonic terror. The terror of being reduced from the subject of knowledge to its object, from the hunter to the hunted, from a human being to an exhibit. We do not know their motives. We do not know their ethics. We do not know if they have any at all. We only know one thing. They are here. They are technologically superior to us by an unimaginable degree, and they are interested in us. And while the rest of the world sleeps, we, the bearers of this tragic knowledge, will continue to keep watch. We will stare into the darkness, because we know that the darkness is staring back, and we must be ready for the moment it decides to blink. And so, we are here, at the end of this long, winding road that began with a single anomaly, with the story of a random speck of cosmic dust, and has led us to the very edge of an existential abyss where our very concept of reality begins to crack. We have gathered the scattered clues like archaeologists excavating the ruins of a forgotten civilization. We have connected the dots that the system tried so diligently to keep separate. We have listened to the voices of skeptics to test the strength of our own theory, and we have stared into the face of the most terrifying of all possible conclusions. We are no longer in a state of comforting, blissful ignorance. We have followed the white rabbit down its hole and discovered that it is far deeper and darker than we could ever have imagined. We have stepped out of Plato's cave and seen, however fleetingly, however distorted by the light, the true, colossal forms of the things that have been casting faint shadows on our wall all this time. But this newfound knowledge brings no relief. It brings no sense of triumph or victory. It brings only weight. It is a tragic, bitter knowledge. The burden of the agonizing realization that you know the truth, but are utterly powerless to change anything. It is a knowledge that does not unite, but isolates. It separates you by an invisible wall from the rest of the world, which continues to live its ordinary, understandable life, unaware of the vast, cold shadow hanging over all of humanity. Imagine this feeling. Try to truly live it. You wake up tomorrow morning. You brew your coffee, scroll through the news feed on your phone. The people around you, in your family, in your city, are discussing the latest political debates, the results of an important sports match, the rising price of gas, or plans for the upcoming holidays. Their world, their reality, is filled with tangible, understandable human concerns. And you look at them, at these beautiful, unsuspecting faces, and you love them for their fragile, precious normality. But you can no longer be a full part of that world. Because in your head, like a persistent, unending hum, a different news story is playing, a story that will never be broadcast on television. The news that humanity, with all its pride and achievements, is no longer the pinnacle of evolution. That our cozy home, the solar system, is not our exclusive property. That somewhere out there, in the icy darkness, a superintelligence is currently flying towards a small, unremarkable asteroid. An intelligence that may have already embedded some kind of information virus into the very heart of our civilization, biding its time. And you cannot tell anyone, not because you fear the consequences, but because no one will ever believe you. They will call you crazy, paranoid, a conspiracy theorist. Your closest loved ones will look at you with pity and concern. You will be rejected, and you will be left utterly alone with this monstrous, unbearable knowledge. This is the burden of the seeker. This is the price paid by anyone who dares to peek behind the curtain. This sense of deep, existential isolation is felt by everyone who has, in one way or another, touched this mystery. It is felt by Stefan Burns, who now observes the night sky in complete solitude, afraid to share his new discoveries even with those he once considered like-minded. It is undoubtedly felt by Eris Thorne, who may be in total informational and physical isolation, cut off from the world by the all-powerful system, having paid with his freedom for the right to give us the key. It is felt by the anonymous insiders who go to work every day at the control centers of NASA and the European Space Agency, forced to smile with stone faces and discuss routine calibration tasks with colleagues, all while knowing that behind the wall of the next restricted office, the best minds on the planet are analyzing data that could turn the world on its head. And you and I, we who have walked this entire path together, who have seen the very same clues and reached the very same disturbing conclusions. We are now also part of this invisible, silent brotherhood of the knowing. We see the finest threads where others see only chaos. We see a complex choreography where others see only chance. We see the cold, calculating gaze of the puppeteer who has remained in the shadows all this time. But what can we do about it? We can publish videos, write long articles, try to shout to the world. But our voice is just one faint note, drowned in the endless, deafening cacophony of information noise in the continuous stream of cat videos, short clips, memes, and political scandals. The system has created a perfect, self-sustaining environment for concealing the truth, not through total, crude censorship as in old, naive dystopias, but through a far more effective mechanism, through total, all-consuming distraction. It does not forbid us from speaking. It simply ensures that no one hears us. And this is where the deepest, most hopeless tragedy of our situation lies. We possess knowledge that could potentially unite all of humanity. The realization of a common, external context, be it an existential threat, or simply the irrefutable fact of another's presence, could become the great catalyst that finally forces us to overcome our petty, tribal, suicidal conflicts. In the face of such a grand mystery, all our national, religious, and ideological differences become ridiculously insignificant. We are all earthlings. We are all in the same small, fragile boat in the middle of a boundless cosmic ocean. But it is precisely this unity, this awakening of a planetary consciousness, that the system fears most. Because a united, self-aware humanity is a force that is virtually impossible to control. Therefore, they prefer to keep us in a state of division, fear, and ignorance. They feed us the soothing fairy tale of a random speck of dust again and again, because that story preserves the status quo. It allows the world to keep spinning on its familiar, predictable axis. And perhaps, in their cold, cynical logic, there is a twisted kind of validity. Perhaps we are not ready. Perhaps this knowledge would indeed destroy us, leading not to global unity, but to global chaos and mutual annihilation in a desperate struggle to be the first to negotiate with the aliens. We will never know, because we were not given the choice, and so we are left with this unbearable burden. We look at the starry sky, but we see it completely differently than other people. To them, it is a symbol of infinite beauty, romance, inspiration, and distant, beckoning worlds. To us, it has become a symbol of oppressive uncertainty and a potential, incomprehensible threat. Every shooting star is no longer a reason to make a wish, but a cause for an anxious, internal question. Is that just a rock, or? Every new astronomical image published by NASA is not a source of childlike wonder, but an object for suspicious, almost paranoid analysis in search of hidden anomalies, artifacts, and signs of tampering. Knowledge has stripped us of our primal innocence. We can no longer simply gaze at the cosmos in awe. We are compelled to constantly interrogate it. And this constant, exhausting vigilance, this perpetual suspicion, makes you feel like a stranger on your own planet. But along with this unbearable burden, this newfound knowledge gives something else. It gives us responsibility. If we are among the few who see the whole picture, or at least its larger fragments, then it is our sacred duty not to give up. Our duty is to keep watching, to keep asking inconvenient questions, to keep connecting the scattered dots on the map of the conspiracy. We alone cannot force the system to tell the truth, but we can make their lies become increasingly obvious, increasingly clumsy, and transparent. We can prepare the ground. We can create and expand a community of people ready for the inevitable day when the truth finally comes out, bursting the dam of silence. And perhaps this is our true mission. Not to expose the conspiracy in one swift blow, but slowly, piece by piece, like patient builders, to construct a new paradigm of thought based on critical analysis, independent inquiry, and a readiness to accept reality, no matter how inconvenient and frightening it may be. We are not warriors. We are keepers. Keepers of a knowledge too great and too dangerous to be entrusted solely to the system and its hidden motives. And the most terrifying, most soul-chilling question that remains with us at the very end of this journey is no longer what happens next, and not even, are they hostile? The most terrifying question, which will now haunt us through sleepless nights, is this. What if we are next on their list? Not for total annihilation, but for detailed, cold study. We extended our most perfect, most sensitive sensor, the James Webb Space Telescope, into the universe, and they dispassionately dissected it. Our next meaningful step in this direction will be the European Hera mission. What if they perceive this as a pattern, as an invitation? What if they decide that to fully, exhaustively understand our species, they need to study not only our soulless machines, but us, their creators? What if one day, one of their dark, silent probes decides not just to scan, but to take a live sample? This thought goes far beyond science fiction. It invades the realm of primal, chthonic terror, embedded in the deepest parts of our collective unconscious. The terror of being reduced from the subject of knowledge to its helpless object, from the hunter to the hunted, from a human being to a biological exhibit. We do not know their motives. We do not know their ethics. We do not know if they have any at all. We only know one thing. They are here. They are technologically superior to us by an unimaginable degree. And for some reason, they are interested in us. And while the rest of the world sleeps, lulled by the system's fairy tales, we, the bearers of this tragic knowledge, will continue to keep our lonely watch. We will stare into the darkness, because now we know for certain that the darkness is staring back, and we must be ready for the moment it decides to blink. The investigation is not over. It is just beginning, and the countdown to the rendezvous at Didymos has already begun. Keep watching.